Chapter 59. In the darkness, there was only silence. Only the sound of chewing could be heard. The faint light illuminated the figure sitting on the chair. He seemed to be in deep thought. His eyes were lowered as he listened to the sound in the distance. After a long time, he sighed. The chief family betrayed us. He whispered, but it doesn't matter. A fence-sitter like the chief family is not trustworthy. Betrayal is expected. Compared to such an unworthy ally, an incompetent subordinate is more of a headache. The sound of chewing stopped abruptly. The darkness was like a big mouth that slowly opened and spat out a naked and thin body. He coughed violently on the ground and wailed miserably. After a long time, he finally woke up from his nightmare. He crawled on the ground like a dog and pounced in front of the figure, kowtowing with all his might. "God have mercy! God have mercy! God have mercy!" he cried and begged. "I was too arrogant. It's me, it's all me. Give me another chance." In the silence, no one spoke. God seemed to be in deep thought. After a long time, he slowly shook his head. "No, Wang Hai," he said. "If the hunting dog's harvest was due to the hunter's instructions, then the failure of the hunting dogs should also be attributed to the negligence of their superiors. This is my mistake. I underestimated your arrogance. After all, you know nothing about the real world." Wang Hai froze on the spot, as if he could not stand the chill in the darkness. He trembled violently and only whimpered from his throat. "Please have mercy on me. Please have mercy on me. Please give me one more chance. I will not fail again." "No, you didn't fail." God slowly shook his head and said calmly, "In fact, you successfully attracted the attention of the Astronomical Association and the Special Affairs Department. Even if you did not stir up a storm, you have already achieved the minimum goal. The reason why you were punished was because of the contempt you had for the Shang God." He stretched out his hand and stroked Wang Hai's head. "You were confused by the currency of mortals and have no respect for true power. You also did not give faith and loyalty to the true gods. You can't be created." Wang Hai's body trembled as he felt the chill and terror coming from that hand. He found it hard to scream, and in the silence, tears flowed down his face. From its throat, let out a whine with all its might. "My lord, have mercy! Have mercy! The Shang God has never been cruel. Wang Hai, even a believer must be compassionate." The Lord looked down at him. "If you ask for my mercy, then I will give you mercy and power." After saying that, the shadow slowly got up from the chair, squatted down, and looked at the pleasantly surprised Wang Hai. He then took out a dagger and gently placed it in front of Wang Hai. Wang Hai's smile froze. "Isn't what you've been trying so hard to seek revenge on the living corpses of the Astronomical Association?" The Lord whispered in his ear, "But now it seems that using someone else to do it is not as good as doing it yourself, right?" The Lord slowly got up and looked at him one last time. "You still have a long time to make your choice before the destruction arrives. You can choose to die obediently, or you can choose to obey the gift of God. This is the Shang God's last generosity to you." He said, "If you can attract some attention later, then jump around as much as you want. Anyway, grasshoppers after autumn are only useful for this. If you can get what you want before death, you will not let down the Shang God's kindness to you." He turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. In the dead silence, there was only Wang Hai lying on the ground, sweating profusely. The pitch-black dagger silently reflected a cold light. In the distance, Huaisher saw a dark car drive out from behind the high wall and drive away. There seemed to be someone sitting in the car, but he could not see clearly because of the reflective sticker. He squatted in the shade and quietly looked at the quiet warehouse in the distance. He looked for a long time, but could not see anything. After all, the transit warehouse took up a large area. From the outside, he could only see a high wall and warehouses. He could vaguely make out the staff dormitory, a 2-story office building, and various containers that were piled up messily and began to fade. In the suburbs, there were no high-rise buildings, so there was no way to see far. If he really wanted to see something, he would have to go in. Stealing a chicken was not an option. After realizing this, Huaisher sighed. He took out a spray from his pocket that Crow gave him and sprayed a layer of it on his body. The mutant's sense of smell was usually far superior to that of canines. Some even had infrared vision. If he really wanted to avoid their nose and eyes, he would need the help of an alchemy potion. Of course, this was just a deodorizing spray refined by Crow. It did not have the function of blocking infrared light, but it was fine as long as he was not seen. After making sure that every corner of her body was evenly spread, Huaishir rubbed her hands, took a deep breath, and jumped over the high wall by clinging onto a crack in the wall. Fortunately, he found a pair of anti-cut gloves in the storage room before he left. Otherwise, he would have taken a big hit from the barbed wire and glass shards on the wall. After landing, he saw that there was no one around. He was relieved. Taking advantage of the night around 9 o'clock at night, he entered the place that resembled an office building. The two-story office building was not big. There were a few departments scattered around, but there was no one around. The doors were not locked. This transit warehouse had not had any business for a long time, so there was no need for these things. Huaishir's face was covered in dust, but she couldn't find anything. Looking out the window, he could see the brightly lit warehouse and the staff dormitory next to it. If he really wanted to find something, he would have to go there. However, the people going in and out were all wearing strange white uniforms. It was difficult to sneak in. Logically speaking, this kind of physical work would avoid any white or dirty colors, but it seemed to be completely different here. The white coat was too wide, and there was even a hood. There was only a snake emblem on the chest that he had never seen before. Huaishir looked at it for a long time, then hammered his palm. Good, I have to find a way to King do it. Then, the target was very important. He hid behind the window for a long time before he saw a person walk to the foot of a nearby wall, lift up his hem, untie his belt, and start to urinate everywhere. Wow, so unethical. Huaishir was stunned. He saw the indescribable part of the other party with the help of the faint light. He could not help but sigh in pity. It's you, little fire dragon. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he quietly jumped over the other side of the building. But just as he jumped out of the window, he felt a beam of light hit his face. Huaishir looked up in surprise and saw another security guard who was also peeing in the corner. How could they hide so well? At that moment, the two of them looked at each other. Who? The patrolling security guard widened his eyes and reached for the baton on his waist. Where did the thief come from? Don't misunderstand. Huaishir's mind raced. Without waiting for him to call out, he raised his hand to stop him. I'm from the gospel class. What's that? The security guard was stunned. He seemed to have heard of this before. Immediately, he was suspicious. Really? Aren't you coming tomorrow? Of course it's true. Look if you don't believe me. Dong xiao xiao, dong xiao xiao. As he spoke, Huaishir began to twist and turn, taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. Then, he opened his mouth and sang, entering the home of God, sitting by the Lord's side. The sweetness is better than our mothers. Hallelujah to heaven. Taking 2 steps forward, Huaishir suddenly kicked the security guard against the wall. Without waiting for him to fall off the wall, Huaishir opened his hand and stuffed all the ashes into his mouth. The security guard rolled his eyes and fainted. This is at least 4 or 5,000 yuan. You made a big profit. Huaishir patted the dust off his hand, shook his head helplessly, and jumped back into the room with him. When he jumped out the window again, he was already wearing his damn white uniform, with a baton on his waist and a flashlight in his hand. If he wore a hood, he would be another security guard. No one would be able to tell if they didn't look closely. He could only be thankful that the corporate culture of the Gue Jing people was good. The gospel class took turns, and even the praise master and youngest singers were the same. Fortunately, he still remembered the tune of the gospel class. Otherwise, wouldn't he have wasted his time today? Huaishir whistled, picked up the flashlight, and swayed toward the center of the transit warehouse. Everything looked normal. Nothing unusual happened. There was no bloody scene. Only the guys in white robes came in and out. Some were still lying in the dormitory, scratching their feet and playing mobile games. It was normal. If he didn't ignore the damn clothes, it would have looked like a factory. The entire transit warehouse was too big. He wandered around aimlessly and couldn't find any targets or gains. He even began to wonder if he was being paranoid and if Wang Hai was hiding here. until his footsteps came to an abrupt stop outside the seemingly ordinary warehouse in the southwest corner. He lowered his head. He saw the ash gradually gathering in his hand. It was the dissipated source substance in the air, filled with the residue of despair and death. Someone died here. In an instant, his hair stood on end. There was more than one. Under the attraction of the hand of confinement, it continued to gather. In Huaishir's hand, it quickly gathered into a small pile. Huaishir was stunned for a moment. He walked around the warehouse and found that the dissipated source substance did come from the warehouse. He casually kicked the collected ash into his pocket and began to look for the entrance. The entire warehouse was sealed from the inside. It seemed that other than the door outside, it was difficult to enter. But Huaishir found a ventilation window about 4 meters above the ground at the back of the warehouse. Just as he was thinking about finding something to climb in, he suddenly smelled a very familiar smell. The smell of blood. When he turned around and lifted the door that was covering the trash, he saw the body that was hidden under it. He was stunned. Was that another security guard? Chapter 60. He had just died, and blood was still flowing out. Huaishir squatted down and stared at the body in front of him in confusion. He pulled out a stick from a trash and fiddled with it. The arm was broken. There was a knife wound on the back, a punctured lung, and a fatal wound on the throat. It was a clean cut, almost split in half. Very quickly, Huaishir put down the stick and the door plank in her hands and covered the corpse again. She turned around and looked at the ventilation window behind her. After taking a few steps forward, she turned around and estimated that the distance was about right. Then, she sprinted forward with all her might. She jumped up and stepped on the wall to move up 30 centimeters. He just reached the pipe on the wall. However, when he lowered his head to look, he found that his footprints overlapped with another faint footprint. When he raised his head and propped himself up, he saw the fingerprints in the dust by the window. Someone had gone in, and their physiques were similar to his, and they were both sublimators who had undergone secondary development. Otherwise, they might have been the champion of a national competition in the fast jump, or even won an indoor climbing award. There was no sound in the warehouse. There was no extra sound. Huaishir quietly landed and looked around, only to see piles of boxes and wires on the ground. The wires extended to the front and disappeared into the wall. Huaishir only saw a huge iron door, and a cold wind was blowing out from behind the iron door. He sensed it deeply, and it was indeed a cold wind. This crappy thing was a cold storage. After mustering up his courage, he went in and took a look around. In the end, he only saw a mountain of pork. The only thing he found was probably 2 corpses that had not yet frozen solid. They had obviously been thrown in at random. The wound was exactly the same as the one on the security guard outside, and it was equally ruthless and fatal. Huaishir reached out, pulled out the sacrificial knife, and looked around carefully. After a long battle of wits and courage with the air, he had to admit regretfully that he was about to freeze into a retard. Also, the murderer might have left long ago. He walked out of the cold storage and couldn't help but sneeze. The sneeze echoed in the warehouse for a long time, but it didn't attract anyone's attention. From the looks of it, other than the corpses, it was just an ordinary factory. However, at this moment, the ashes in his hand were rapidly appearing. In just a few minutes, he had already accumulated almost half of his bag. The concentration of origin substances floating in the air was shockingly high. Pain and despair radiated from him at all times, almost turning the entire warehouse into a haunted house. Most people wouldn't be able to stand it after staying here for more than a few minutes. Only an idiot like Huaishir would go around looking for plastic bags to collect the ashes. In any case, the shattered origin substance had been scattered from this place. There must be a source. After repeated calculations and experiments, Huaishir finally found where it came from. In fact, there was no need to deliberately calculate. Everyone could clearly see such a large crack in the wall. The secret space that was originally hidden behind the wall was not sealed. The verification of the iris and fingerprint did not work. In any case, with such a large dead person's arm stuck on the slide rail, the freezer on the floor couldn't be pushed over, right? With such a large entrance right in front of his eyes, it took him a long time to find it by relying on the concentration of the ashes. Huaishir once again gained a new understanding of his investigative abilities. Behind the door was a dark space. Stepping over the corpses on the ground and continuing forward, he could see a staircase that extended downwards into the darkness. In the silence, he silently crept forward. He vaguely saw a shadow with its back facing him. He immediately pulled out his handgun nervously and carefully approached. But just as his handgun was pressed against the back of the person's head, the person fell forward like a piece of rotten wood, crashing to the ground. He had already lost his life. Bang! The sacrificial knife and the dagger that came from the darkness behind him collided, creating a sharp sound. Someone had taken advantage of Huaishir's distraction to hide in the darkness and try to stab him in the back. However, they didn't expect that Huaishir had a bug-like premonition of death. In the instant of the collision, Huaishir turned around, stomped the ground, and rushed forward. In the almost lightless darkness, he charged toward the person. The so-called blind fight also required skill. No, it would be more appropriate to say that it was a cold weapon fight in the dark. A person's joints, the way they held their weapons, and even their moves were limited. If one was familiar with this, the moment the weapons collided, one could even guess the opponent's position, the posture, and even the posture of the weapon. Although it seemed thrilling, in the final analysis, it was a cruel game of deduction that was as good as drawing cards. However, some people had already turned the process into instinct. In the darkness, the two collided. At the same time, Zhang Heng raised his elbow to block the other's hand that was holding the gun. Then, the dagger and the sacrificial knife collided again. In the ink-like darkness, there were constantly sparks flying in the air without any pattern. It was a sign of the coldness of the collision of the blades. The two tacitly did not choose to shoot. Instead, they tried to kill each other as silently as possible. In just a few seconds of fighting, the weapons had collided several times. In the end, the two sides found each other's location in the darkness at the same time. They turned around, took a step forward, and slashed with all their strength. The sacrificial knife and the dagger collided again. A spark burst out from the friction between the two metals, illuminating the two people close to each other and the masks on their faces. One of them was wearing a Peppa Pig mask. The other was wearing Ma Baoli mask. In an instant, there was a dead silence. The original murderous intent disappeared and was replaced by an indescribable awkwardness. In the silence, Ma Baoli was the first to break the silence. She coughed twice and said, "What a coincidence." "Yes." Huaishir nodded. "What a coincidence." The atmosphere fell into awkwardness again. In the endless staring contest, the person on the other side asked again, "How should I address you?" "A real man never changes his name." Huaishir replied proudly, "Just call me Little Peppa Pig from Huaihai Road." "What about you?" "Nice to meet you." The person on the other side introduced herself. "Little Peppa Pig from Hutai Road." Thus, the atmosphere became awkward again. They could not fight anymore. Although he had never heard of Little Peppa Pig from Hutai Road, why did he feel like he had seen her somewhere before? Huaishir was silent for a long time. Then he asked, "Have you eaten?" "Yes." Little Peppa Pig nodded. "Are you taking a walk?" "Yes." Another 2 sentences of meaningless conversation. Perhaps it was because she knew that the other party's background was similar to hers, or perhaps it was because she did not want to waste any more time. Little Peppa Pig took the initiative to make a suggestion. "Then, shall we walk?" "Yes, let's walk." Huaishir took a step back. The two of them slowly put away their swords and separated themselves. They leaned against the wall and maintained the greatest vigilance. At the same time, they gestured for the other party to go first. It would be better to expose the vital parts of their backs. Then, they realized that the other party was not stupid and was too easy to fool. They could only advance together. Inexplicably, when Huaishir came to his senses, he realized that he seemed to have gained another teammate. On the short flight of stairs, the two of them exchanged some meaningless pleasantries. Then, they racked their brains to find out where the person who copied their character came from. Finally, the two of them stopped at the end of the stairs. There were 2 forks in the road. One went up and seemed to lead to somewhere else, while the other went down and led deeper underground. Little Peppa Pig looked around. Finally, her gaze fell on Huaishur. Up, down? Her meaning was self-evident. Since it was difficult to trust each other, it was better to split up. But should it be up or down? Huaishur scratched his head and thought for a long time. Then he said, "Man walks to higher places and water flows to lower places. So it's up, then." Little Peppa Pig waved her hand and walked down the path. However, she did not expect Huaishur to follow behind her. She was stunned. "Didn't you say that man walks to higher places? So, sometimes, you might as well make a cup of happy otaku." Huaishur replied sincerely. What he said seemed to be very philosophical. What a joke. His investigation ability was so weak that it took him more than 10 minutes to find an open hidden door. If he walked alone, he might not even know if the important items floated past him. Interstellar players were too sad. It was better to find someone to come with them. After all, they were all thieves. Huaishur did not want any stolen goods. He could even help. It was reasonable to just want to share information, right? Of course, he would never admit that this place was too dark and gloomy. He was a little scared. "Are you sure?" Little Peppa Pig looked at him deeply. "Forget it. As long as you don't get in the way, I'll pick first. You can have them all." Huaishur waved his hand. He had no interest in the stolen goods or the property of the purified people. He was only here to find someone. It would be a pleasant surprise if he could find out why these guys were hiding in the warehouse of his previous home. Just as they were moving forward, the two of them stopped abruptly. There was someone in front, or rather, they finally saw a place that looked like a concierge. Behind the window, they could see a small room. There was a pot of stew on the stove, and a song and dance was playing on the TV. The middle-aged man guarding the place was sitting on a chair with his back facing the window. He was watching TV and eating snacks attentively. He did not even look at the surveillance screen in the corner. Little Peppa Pig pressed Little Peppa Pig back when she pulled out the knife. "Don't be so rough." Huaishur sighed. Let me do it. Let me do it." He put on his hood again, picked up the security guard's baton and flashlight, walked over, and knocked on the window. He was about to resume his old business of gospel singing when he saw the pot on the stove. There was a human head slowly rising and falling in the pot of stew. There were also a few arms and legs stewed until they were soft and tender. The security guard and the concierge turned around. Huaishur opened his mouth several times, but did not know what to say. In the end, he sighed. He pulled out the sacrificial knife. Some things, it was better to be rough. Chapter 61. 10 seconds later, Huaishur sat calmly in the gatehouse, extinguished the fire in the furnace, and pulled out the shiny sacrificial knife from the withered corpse. Ma Baoli came in and walked around, marveling at Huaishur's knife skills. Huaishur looked at the passage behind the gatehouse and asked casually, "Old Lu, what's hidden behind this?" "It should be their fasting circle," Ma Baoli said casually, then jumped up in shock. F***CK. How did you know it was me?" Huaishur looked back at him. "I was just asking casually. After all, I don't know many people who are so flirtatious." "Ahem, I was just asking casually." Ma Baoli looked at him innocently. "Who's old Lu?" "A bald man." "That's enough." The two looked at each other in the gatehouse. After a long time, Yu Dongri looked away helplessly. "Who are you?" Huaishur asked. "As you can see, a cowherd." Yu Dongri shrugged. "I'm also the 4th-class security officer of the Astronomy Society and a bunch of other miscellaneous positions." "Huh?" Huaishur was stunned. "What's that?" "It's a double insurance that bypasses the regulations." Ma Baoli sat on the chair and sighed. In some sensitive areas, the Astronomy Society uses a double supervision system. There are 2 supervisors, one in the light and one in the dark. The former is involved in disputes, and the latter is responsible for recording the truth and secretly investigating when the former is inconvenient. Just like the purified people this time. On one hand, I'm AI Qing's examiner, responsible for reviewing whether she can use the authority of supervisor fairly. On the other hand, I'm also her bodyguard and fighter. But in order to avoid sensitive issues by directly deploying a sublimator, I can only take a detour, you understand? So you committed a crime? More or less. Yu Dongri sighed. In short, Once this matter is over, I will leave. In order to avoid failing my year-end evaluation, you have to pretend that you don't know anything. I've also written in the report that you're born with divine strength and don't know martial arts. How about we help each other out? Huaisher looked at him warily. Will I be killed if I don't help? If you don't help, you'll have to return the gift I gave you. I will help. I will help. Huaisher instantly revealed a smile. Really, we're so close that we don't have to be so distant. I'll give you 2 more sets of overlords later. Yu Dongri tried very hard to resist the urge to kill this little bastard on the spot. By the way, did AI Qing pass or not? I've already passed the first year, all right? Yu Dongri rolled his eyes behind a mask. If it weren't for the fact that this place is related to the deep hell, Shanghai, I would have left long ago. I wouldn't have had to suffer like this. Also, what's Shanghai? Go ask AI Qing when you get back. I've already said enough. Yu Dongri stood up, not wanting to argue with him any longer. Ever since he had gotten involved with this guy, nothing good had happened to him. After spending some time to take care of the surveillance, he took the key that he had found on the guard's clothes and opened the door to the back. He saw a pile of open boxes piled up in the corner, and a nauseating stench filled the air. It smelled like something rotten. After entering this place, Huaisher felt an unknown amount of origin substance begin to gather around him. The bag that was originally used to store the ashes suddenly became bulging. The despair in the air almost suffocated him. Those death records had definitely floated out from here. However, contrary to his expectations, there wasn't anyone guarding this place at all. Why are there so few people? Yu Dongri surveyed his surroundings and said in a muffled voice, "This can only mean one thing, which is that they're retreating. Let's not talk about the people outside, but the real higher-ups have probably already run away, right?" As he spoke, he walked into the deepest part of the room. It was like a plaza. Traces of abyss sediment floated in the air, exuding a powerful poison that normal people would find hard to resist. The ground was carved with indecipherable inscriptions, as if this was the scene of some kind of sacrifice. Even the sacrificial blade in Huaisher's arms began to tremble with excitement. Huaisher stepped inside. Apart from the blood-stained platform in the center, there were only large mirrors around him. Each one was about the size of shopping mall's entrance, and they were all intricately placed in the center of the plaza. Even though they were clearly mirrors, their reflections couldn't be seen. It was incredibly strange. This is the fasting circle. Yu Dongri's voice was emotionless. This is the method that the purified citizens use to raise border mutants. Do you see those mirrors? They're actually all cages that have been blessed after a ceremony. They lead to a separate hell known as a mirror realm. They use the mirrors to bring the border mutants back from hell and then raise them in the mirror realm. They feed them with flesh and blood until they finally obtain a predator that listens to them. Now, all of the cages are empty. Pa! A shadow curled up in the corner seemed to have kicked something. Noticing that they were looking at him, he turned around and tried to run away, but Huaisher pressed him to the ground. "Mercy! Mercy!" The fat man lay on the ground, trembling. "I don't know anything. Really. I'm only responsible for burning the boiler. I don't know anything." Around his neck hung several gold chains of different styles. On his arms were various bracelets inlaid with gold or jade. Even his 10 fingers were covered with rings of various colors. His body was adorned with all kinds of jewelry, and even his shoes looked like high-end handmade work. However, no matter how one looked at him, he looked like a thief. He had nothing to do with the expensive jewelry on his body. Being pressed down by Huaisher, he began to tremble. There was even a fishy smell coming from his crotch. He had already peed. "I really don't know anything. I only know how to burn the boiler. What they did has nothing to do with me. I also want to live. Spare me. Spare me." Huaisher frowned and was about to ask when he noticed that Yu Dongri patted him on the shoulder and pointed to the front. There was a small door there. Don't touch my family." The fat man's eyes widened as he struggled. Come at me. They are innocent. Don't touch my wife and daughter. Please, please." Yu Dongri did not speak. He quickly stepped forward and kicked. Bang! The door was kicked open. The narrow space behind was revealed. The first thing they saw was a huge boiler. The flames were jumping inside, and thick smoke was rising from the chimney. It was unbearably hot. But in the open furnace, in addition to the red-hot charcoal and coal, there were a few lumps of charcoal that were vaguely distinguishable as limbs. They were about to be burned to ashes. When Huaisher looked away, he saw luxury goods, luxury goods, luxury goods. All kinds of luxury goods were hung in almost every corner. There were high-end suits cut open to be used as bed sheets, branded satchels stuffed with pots and pans, expensive watches, necklaces, bracelets, and wallets that were strung together and hung on the wall. There was only a dirty bed in the corner. There was a blow-up doll covered with tape lying on the bed. There were 2 Barbie dolls next to it. They were exquisitely and adorably dressed. The fat man screamed and struggled with all his might to break free from Huaisher's grip. He crawled up and threw himself onto the bed. He hugged the inflatable doll and the little person in his arms and cried loudly. He turned around and said something about begging for mercy. Huaisher opened his mouth to ask something, but no words came out. Only Yu Dongri walked up, rolled up his sleeves, and pulled the fat man up. He kept asking questions and even used his ability. After a long time, he let go of his hand in frustration and threw the fat man on the ground. It's useless. He's gone crazy. Yu Dongri lit a cigarette in annoyance. Damn, nothing good will come out of being involved with this group of lunatics. Then let's go. Isn't there a fork in the road? Huaisher couldn't stand it anymore. He turned around and wanted to leave, but for some reason, he accidentally saw the fat man's finger. To be exact, it was the index finger of his right hand. Then he froze in place. Yu Dongri, who was walking in front, noticed that he didn't follow. He turned around in confusion. Let's go. What's wrong? You go first. Huaisher was silent for a long time. I have something to do. I'll catch up with you later. Yu Dongri looked at him in confusion. He didn't know what he was thinking. He wanted to ask, but when he saw the teenager's eyes, he couldn't ask. He had never seen such a calm expression on Huaisher's face. It was so calm that it made people uncomfortable. It was as if there was something chilling hidden behind that layer of shell. I'll be at the door. Yu Dongri turned around and left. In the silence, Huaisher listened to his footsteps as he walked away. He walked into the incineration room and gently closed the door. That ring, he looked down at the fat man's right index finger. He looked at the platinum ring inlaid with broken diamonds. That ring, where did you get it? I don't know what you're talking about. The crying madman looked at him blankly. He subconsciously hid his right hand behind his back and dodged backward. I picked it up. I picked it up. Bang! His head hit the wall and squashed his inflatable wife. His fat face was almost deformed and twisted into a strange shape. Let me ask you. Huaisher lowered his head and looked into his eyes. He asked word by word, that ring, where did you get it? In the violent collision, the madman screamed in confusion. I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just a boiler. Spare me. Spare me. Huaisher closed his eyes. He covered the madman's mouth with his palm. When he opened his eyes again, his eyes were crazily bloodshot. Immediately after, pitch-black ashes emerged from his palm and poured into his body. For the last time, he leaned down and stared at the madman's face. The ring, where did you get it? The man's eyes widened and tears flowed down. He opened his mouth and wanted to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. Huaisher picked up his 2 daughters on the ground with one hand and crushed them one by one, in front of his eyes. I don't know. I really don't know. The man finally broke down and wailed. Why did you kill them? Why? I'm just doing my job and burning the boiler. Those things, they said they didn't want it. I just wanted to give them some gifts. Huaisher let go of his hand. The madman pounced on him crazily and wanted to strangle his neck, but he was kicked away. In the end, he curled up in the corner and hugged the remains of a few dolls, sobbing in despair. I'm sorry. Huaisher lowered his eyes and walked up to him. He grabbed his hand and violently pulled the ring off. Then he turned and left. The door closed behind him. Are you okay? Yu Dongri, who was leaning against the wall in the corner and smoking, asked. Pretty good. Huaisher looked at the ring in his palm and put it in his pocket. He said, couldn't be better. Boom! In that instant, a violent explosion suddenly came from above them. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. Countless fragments fell from the ceiling and smashed down, crushing the empty mirror into pieces. Chapter 62. It shook violently as if explosives had exploded above. They could hear gunshots in the distance, as if someone was constantly attacking this place. Tremors and roars continued to sound from the underground space. Huai Shi and Yu Dongri looked at each other and remembered the unexplored path. They ran up the stairs. When they reached the end of the path, they only saw corpses all over the floor. It seemed that this was the gathering place of the entire sacrificial grounds. The spacious office was decorated magnificently, but at this moment, the glorious pillars and reliefs on the walls were covered in blood. Corpses lay on the ground one after another. Their faces were filled with confusion and despair. Even the flattering smile had not dissipated. Gunshots continued to sound from the inner area. The massacre was ongoing. When they broke into the inner room, they only saw Wang Hai hiding behind the table and begging for mercy. There was also a burly figure standing in front of the table. Under the sleeves of the heavy coat, there were 2 hands covered in scales. There was also a pair of pitch-black machetes. Blood dripped from the blade of the machete and drew a scarlet trail on the ground. It extended toward Wang Hai step by step. "If you dare to kill me, God will not let you go." Wang Hai was forced into a corner. His face was pale. "I'm the representative of God. How dare you? If I die, you will pay the price." "Definitely." He waved the dagger in his hand, but it was useless. The man with the machete stepped forward and cut the obstacles in front of him into pieces. The machete whistled and slashed toward Wang Hai's head. Yu Dongri pulled out his gun. Huai Shi never thought that his marksmanship would be so good that he could hit the blade in the air. Then, the remaining 5 bullets all hit the back of the man's head. Unfortunately, after piercing through the clothes and scales, it was unable to penetrate the mutated skull. The man with the machete staggered. The blade fell between Wang Hai's legs, causing him to let out a short and sharp scream. Tears and snot were already out of fear. "Help! Help!" As if he saw his savior, he looked at the 2 people who rushed in and shouted, "Help me! I have money. I have tens of millions. I'll give you whatever you want." Needless to say, how could Huai Shi watch as the last person who knew the inside story was killed in front of him? He decisively pulled out his pistol and aimed at the man with the knife who had turned around and pulled the trigger repeatedly. Amidst the roaring gunshots, sparks spewed out from the barrel of the gun. Along with the scorching red bullet, it flew towards the face of the wielder that had already transformed to the point where it could no longer be seen as a human. Its face, which was covered in scales, was not much different from the crying snake's. There were only 2 small holes, and its dark green lips could not hide its sharp teeth. What was even more frightening was its pair of golden vertical pupils. It was hard to tell if it was more like a lizard or a snake. That was a strange characteristic of cold-blooded animals. It made one's heart turn cold. Just as Huai Shi raised his pistol, the scimitar in his hand had already been raised to protect his face. The black scimitar was like a shield, deflecting all the bullets. Then, the scimitar in his right hand slashed towards Yu Dongri. However, before the scimitar in his left hand could change direction, he heard the whistling of the wind beside his ear. It was like a sharp axe. Paige, who was 7 steps away, was already in front of him. The sacrificial knife in his hand was swinging horizontally toward his neck, so fast, the golden vertical pupils quickly contracted, and the scimitar in front of his eyes blocked the sacrificial knife. However, it felt like it had collided with an axe. The blocking posture was instantly destroyed by the terrifying inertia. It was like a hot knife through butter. At that moment, Huai Shi saw the Naga holding the knife suddenly tilt. It was as if he had slipped, but then the air seemed to have turned into a viscous substance. Under the stirring of the Naga's arms, an undercurrent appeared and knocked Huai Shi to the point of staggering. Then he saw the Naga fly into the air. No, it should be said that he was swimming in the sea, because the air around him had instantly turned into a nearly liquid state. It broke free from the shackles of gravity and swam in the invisible sea. This was his sole ability. In an instant, he dodged Huai Shi and Yu Dongri's pincer attack. Then, he spun nimbly in the air. The scimitar in his hand cut through the liquid air and slashed towards the two people who were unable to adapt to such a situation. Yu Dongri blocked in a sorry state, but Huaishur threw out a plastic bag. The plastic bag was broken by the blade. Then, the ash inside was quickly activated under the influence of the hand of confinement. In an instant, the invisible sea was contaminated by the ash and turned pitch black. Violent coughing sounds were heard, but Huaishur did not stop moving. He threw himself straight into it. Yu Dongri was dumbfounded. When did his little brother become so stubborn? But in an instant, he heard the sharp hiss of a snake in the darkness. The red sacrificial knife pierced through the pitch-black sea and came out from the other side. Blood flowed on the blade. In an instant, the sea exploded. The burly Naga fell to the ground. There was a miserable cut on his left arm. It was almost completely cut off by the sacrificial knife. In the sharp sound of the blades colliding, Huaishur was expressionless. He suddenly raised his foot and stomped down. Bang! The Naga who fell to the ground suddenly shook. The scimitar in his right hand was knocked away by Huaishur's sacrificial knife. The teenager wearing the Pepsi mask trampled on his chest, raised the sacrificial knife with both hands, and suddenly stabbed down. Execution! Bang! At that moment, an arm suddenly stretched out from the gap in the snake man's coat. It held a scimitar and blocked the attack, even though the hand was chopped into pieces by the force of the axe on the blade. A third hand? Then a fourth hand. In the gap, the fourth hand, hidden behind the Naga, stretched out. It held a short-barreled shotgun, aimed at Huaishur's face, and pulled the trigger. The teenager's movement was faster than his. He leaned back in an instant and dodged the sudden killer. Yu Dongri saw it clearly. Not only did the serpent man suddenly grow 2 extra arms, but there were also wisps of gray mist rising from the young man's body in that instant. It was the ashes that erupted from the seal. They danced like flames, and the power of pain radiated in all directions. The whole inner room was shrouded in irresistible despair. Beneath the mask, the pair of pitch-black eyes had unknowingly turned completely red. It was like a burning fire. The thin teenager had turned into an evil spirit in the mountain. What kind of sacred mark was this? In the pedigree that Yu Dongri knew, there was no such existence. Even if it was only at the mercury level, it was so terrifying. But he had no time to think. He instinctively rushed forward, lifted the mask, and wanted to force the four-armed Naga to see his face. Then he felt that his leg was entangled by something. It was a tail, a slender snake tail. No, it should be said, Yu Dongri finally remembered. The sacred mark on that guy was not a Naga, but a gold-level sacred mark that originated from the second stage of the Brahmin pedigree in India. Naga. The characteristic of having 4 arms was probably a mutation that had been passed down to Myanmar. Then he was thrown out. At the last moment, he threw out the short knife in his hand, trying to restrain the counterattacking Naga. But then he saw that one of Naga's arms abandoned the machete, took out a flash bomb from his arms, and threw it at them. The next moment, a violent flash of light engulfed them. Huaishur quickly retreated, and the blade in his hand slashed forward. It seemed that nothing had been hit, but it seemed that he had cut something. Then they heard the sound of a gunshot. In the intense dizziness and nausea, Huaishur bent down, took out a bag of ashes from his arms, and threw it on the ground. The black fog engulfed everything. This move seemed to prevent the opponent from taking the opportunity to sneak attack, but when they recovered from the intense dizziness, they could no longer see Naga. He had escaped. Wang Hai was left in a pool of blood on the ground. His throat and chest had been cut open by a sharp blade, and blood was gushing out. He could not say anything. Huaishur rushed forward and reached out to check his pulse, but soon he withdrew his fingers. There was no saving him. A layer of dark green appeared on the wound, and the knife was dipped in poison. No, if it was the poisonous dragon Naga, it would be strange if it was not dipped in poison. Yu Dongri took a look and did not waste any more time. He seized the time to rummage through all the valuable documents. Huaishur helped Wang high up from the ground and tried to open his eyes. Wake up. You still have time. Who killed you? He took out the ring from his pocket. Who killed him? Who told you to hide here? Speak. Wang Hai. Wang Hai struggled with all his might, like a fish out of water. His two hands struggled to grab the life that abandoned him. He left a trail of blood on Huaishi's collar and tore off Huaishi's mask. When he saw Huaishi's face, he was stunned. Soon, his eyes became resentful and vicious. It's you. It's all your fault. His lips opened and closed, and he kept spitting out blood. But soon, a mocking smile appeared on his face. We will all die soon. He suddenly stopped struggling and grabbed the dagger beside him. He stabbed at his heart. Bang! Scarlet spurted out and fell on Huaishi's blank face. The fire burned. In a violent vibration, the upper layer seemed to explode again, and the bottom layer was about to collapse. Huaishi sighed and slowly put Wang Hai down. He put away the ring. What happened after that was nothing to write home about. Yu Dongri took him out of the transit warehouse before the Special Affairs Department arrived and even drove him home. Looking at his distracted look, Cowherd could not help but shake his head. I know you have a lot of questions to ask. Have a good rest tonight. You can come to the detective's office tomorrow. Huaishi nodded, got out of the car, and watched him go away. When he returned home and opened the door of the living room, he saw Crow waiting there. You seem to need someone to talk to. The black bird stood on top of the boiling kettle and asked, Coffee? Tea? Chapter 63. When Huaishi put down the teacup, he felt as if the world had suddenly become clear. He didn't know if he should say that he was relieved of a burden or if he had gained some enlightenment. He was as calm as a monk in meditation. There was no fluctuation in his heart, as if he had gained enlightenment and seen through the world of mortals. Soon, he reacted and looked down at the rippling purple in the teacup. What is this? It's a special type of spiritual anesthetic. Crow raised his wings and pointed to the remaining tube on the table. I cut off some leftovers from the crying snake's horn and made 2 tubes. If you like them, I'll give them to you. Anesthetic? Huaishi asked. What is it used for? Let me think about how to put it. Crow pondered for a moment. If the physical anesthetic is to block out the pain, then it is to let you temporarily abandon your desires. After taking it, for a short period of time, you won't feel anger, hesitation, or sadness. At the same time, you won't feel happiness, or pleasure. According to the creator of the medicine, the thing that hinders people from pursuing enlightenment is this innate instinct and emotion. Only after losing all of this, people will gain calmness from nothingness and obtain true rationality. And then do what you need to do. Crow shrugged. It's just a tranquilizer. What magical effect can it have? But sometimes this calmness that is not disturbed by external things is the most precious thing. At least the choice made in this situation will not make people regret it. As for the other effects, they are secondary. Huaishi understood. So it's a regret medicine? It should be called no-regret medicine. Crow asked, how do you feel? Very good. Huaishi let out a long breath and found a more comfortable position in the chair. He slowly relaxed and finally felt tired and sleepy. It was 3:00 in the morning. It was time to sleep. Then Crow asked, did you get anything? Nothing, except for this. Huaishi swung his hand and threw the ring on the table. The platinum ring embedded with broken diamonds circled around the table a few times, then fell down and calmed down as it spun. The 2 names engraved on the inside of the ring were revealed. My parents are probably dead. In the silence, Huaishi lowered his head and stared at his parents' wedding rings, finally accepting this reality. Crow shook his head. Maybe he pawned it? Well, maybe he lost it. That's possible. Huaishi nodded. Thank you for your medicine. I feel much more relaxed now. There's no need to thank me. Crow shook his head. Just treat it as a contractor's duty. I'm going to sleep first. Do you still have work to do? I'll probably have to work overtime. Crow turned around and looked at the dim glow that was slowly rising from the reactor. The last stage is almost over. You really should rest. Huaishi, have a good sleep. Everything will pass. Okay. Huaishi got up and walked to the bedroom. But when he stepped on the stairs, he saw the white mark on the wall where the family photo was originally hung. His footsteps stopped. After a long time, he said, I really miss them. I know. Crow turned his back to him and didn't say anything else. Only the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. She quietly looked at the boiling metal light in the crucible, listening to the echoes like the sound of the tide. Like a patient farmer, waiting for the moment of maturity. A miracle from the abyss was silently brewing in the crucible. Not long after, Huaisher's puberty would come to an end. This was the last step of all the supplements, laying the foundation of the omnipotence of the stigmata. If puberty was always accompanied by growth, then growth was often painful. This pain was worth remembering and experiencing. It would eventually be engraved in the body, along with the miracle. Sleep, Huaisher. The black bird whispered softly. I promise, this is the last cruel education. From now on, you'll have a bright future. As for the uninvited guest, leave it to the master of this place to deal with. Half an hour ago, in the collapsed sacrificial ground, in the inner room filled with stones, Wang Hai's corpse suddenly twitched. The dagger that pierced his heart quietly shattered, turning into black dust and merging into his cold blood. As a result, strands of viscous liquid slowly flowed out from the corpse, gradually condensing into an illusory shadow. Like a moth struggling out of a cocoon, it wriggled and greedily absorbed the blood on the ground. It wriggled and swallowed the corpses on the ground one by one, hissing in pain. It's all your fault. A voice that sounded like a cry came from his throat, sharp and resounding. It's all your fault. You're dead. We're all going to die. The Tao Hie seed that had been implanted in this body since the baptism had finally sprouted in death. A strange creature, made of origin substance, was born from death with the final hatred of its host. Just like what the Lord had said to Wang Hai, the Saint God's final mercy had descended here, even if the miracle from the abyss did not bring happiness and peace. Hate, I hate. Tears of blood flowed down the distorted face that looked like Wang Hai's. The shadow crawled on the ground, wailing like a deformed hunting dog, rolling around in pain. In the end, it found a small button in a crack. Found it. It licked the button that had fallen off the youth's sleeve, letting out a happy and manic cry. Found it, found it, found it, found you. In an instant, the shadow surged and swallowed the button. It wriggled in ecstasy, drilling through the cracks and returning to the ground. It was impossible to see the shadow pass by on the ground. After breaking free from the restraints of matter, it was already so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. It leapt straight past the sleeping city, constantly bypassing all kinds of obstacles. It did not care about the people that brushed past it as it charged straight in the direction of the Stone Marrow Hall. In the end, it passed through the gloomy forest and stopped outside the iron door. Under the moonlight, the shadow on the ground wriggled hungrily, constantly crashing forward. However, it could not pass through the iron door that was big enough for a stray cat to enter freely. In the end, it jumped through the crack in the wall, jumped into the weedy courtyard, and hungrily crawled toward Huaisher's lock. There was a pop, like the sound of a bubble bursting. It was sent flying. In the broken window on the side of the main building, a pale face and a distorted body were reflected. It was like 7 or 8 people's organs were randomly pieced together. Several limbs were wriggling randomly, and the huge mouth in the abdomen was constantly opening and closing, dripping blood like saliva. It also reflected the figure in front of it. In the dirty glass, only a thin and tall figure could be seen. It could vaguely make out the clothes that were riddled with holes, the bow tie that was meticulously pinned to the broken collar, and the monocle that rested on the bridge of the nose. But at this moment, he was like a patrolling guard who saw a thief trying to climb over the wall. His face, which was clearly empty, showed unmistakable anger. The lips opened and closed in a silent warning. Get out! The completely out of control, corroded body screamed, waving its limbs wildly and pressing forward step by step. Then, the figure raised its left hand. The 5 fingers slowly closed. Silently, an invisible force closed in toward the center. Like a collision between iron walls, the ghost was squashed into a ball of paste. Then, the paste spontaneously combusted, leaving only a wisp of black smoke that disappeared into the air. The button that fell on the ground was carefully picked up. After washing it in front of the hose, the figure repeatedly wiped it with an old towel and put it in a box in the backyard's utility room. It was carefully placed together with a few dirty toys, 2 broken certificates, and an old photo of a baby. The box closed. The figure nodded slightly to Crow and said goodbye. Then it silently dissipated. In the quiet room, the 4-armed Naga sat in front of the mirror, quietly wiping the blood on the wound. After cleaning the withered wound, he took out a knife and scraped the lifeless, rotten flesh bit by bit, until the mournful bones below were exposed. He bent down and opened the box on the ground. After hesitating for a moment, he took out a tube of fiery red medicine. After opening the seal, he gritted his teeth and poured the boiling metal solution on the wound. In the sizzling sound, the Naga spasmed violently, letting out a dull roar. His long tail twitched, almost stirring the entire bathroom into pieces. In the end, the metal solution finally formed on the bones and merged with the flesh. It was like a new skin texture, indistinguishable from each other. Except for the tragic gap in the scales, no other wounds could be seen. He breathed a sigh of relief as if he had collapsed. Removing the sacred mark, the burly Naga in the mirror slowly shrank. Even the 2 extra arms were retracted into the shoulder blades. The man named Iluo was sweating profusely and panting. He looked at himself in the mirror. After a long time, he splashed his face with cold water and finally took 2 steps back. He slumped into the chair, his face pale. After a long time, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Boss," he said, "I might have screwed up." "Did you fail?" "No. The people who know are all dead. But when I was silencing them, I met 2 ascendants. I don't know where they are from." On the other end of the phone, Chiwin was silent for a long time. He sighed regretfully. "Then we can only use the backup method." The phone hung up. Chapter 64. In the morning, the underground warehouse of the city library welcomed its guests again. The professor looked like a mountain of meat, as usual. When AI Ching arrived, he seemed to be reading something interesting as he laughed from time to time. "You're early." When he saw AI Ching, he closed his book. "You didn't sleep? It seems like the warehouse incident last night was really troublesome. I thought you would come in the afternoon." "There are a lot of trivial matters." AI Ching, who hadn't slept all night, looked pale, but her expression was still calm. "It's better to solve it as soon as possible." "Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee, double sugar, no milk." "What a coincidence. I just got some good beans yesterday." The professor happily took out his tools. After a while, the aroma of coffee came from the drip pot. Soon, a cup of coffee was placed in front of AI Ching. "Please enjoy." After AI Ching finished the coffee, her face seemed to look better. After putting down the cup, which was still stained with sugar, she let out a long breath and tried to cheer herself up. She waited for the results of the investigation. Soon, a thick stack of documents was placed on the table. "The things you asked me to investigate are all here." The professor clapped his hands and arranged the copies of the contracts and the complicated documents in front of her. Since 12 years ago, Chiwin has already had some relationship with the Savior Society. The 2 sides have cooperated to a certain extent, but they have always maintained some boundaries. Unfortunately, there is no direct, decisive evidence. But, as far as I know, the one who has been working with Chiwin all these years, the one who supports him should be the Een family, right? As he spoke, he placed a thick file in front of AI Ching and asked curiously, "Are you going to put righteousness before family this time? Which country are you talking about?" AI Ching rubbed her forehead in annoyance. Back then, Chiwin relied on being the Een family's agent to save up the capital. From the beginning to the end, he was just a dog. Now, he is an old dog with an ambition that can't be controlled. Even if he dies, the Een family won't lose a single strand of hair. What's more, will a guy like Chiwin leave any evidence behind? The professor shrugged and didn't say anything else. In the silence, there was only the sound of pages flipping. After giving up on the aimless search for the Savior Society's movement over the years and turning to the connection between Chi-1 and the Savior Society, the professor's efficiency increased many times over. In just one day, they had obtained a large number of clues through various channels. After combining all the paper records of Exine High City in the underground library over the years, this thick stack of records was formed. Putting aside the large number of property rights changes, the transformation and changes of the industries under Chi went in the past 2 years, as well as the special channel of Tomorrow News, even the various projects that Chi when secretly operated were dug out. However, even AI Ching couldn't believe the results of the investigation. He wants to monopolize the shipping routes and supplies at the border of Penghu. AI Ching was amused by the results of the investigation. He is in charge of the transportation of goods and materials at the border of the sea. What makes him worthy? So far, it seems that he spent a large amount of money to lobby and guarantee, and he has already obtained the right to bid. The professor threw a macaron into his mouth and chewed. If there is someone behind him, it might not be impossible. AI Ching understood. You mean the Yin family? The professor shrugged slightly. I only know that he has been running to Jinling very frequently these days. She had to admit that the professor's guess was very reasonable. The benefits of monopolizing the shipping routes at the border were definitely not just money. The hidden benefits behind it were also shockingly huge. Imagine, in a border that was isolated overseas, all the ascendants had to rely on themselves to travel and explore. If the Chi family could really bring such huge benefits to the Yin family, then the old man might not care about Chi Wen's alienation over the years. Rather, after the two sides let go of their previous grudges, the cooperation between the two sides will become even closer. And Chi Wen also fought for the initiative in this process. He was no longer an agent and a white glove that relied on someone else's charity, but a crucial collaborator that completed the transformation from a chess piece to a chess player. Things were different now. The more important it was at this juncture, the more she couldn't mess things up. If she wanted to use the Savior Society to investigate Chi Wen, that old dog might do something. However, the next content of the file made her frown. Smuggling. Smuggling had never been a big deal, or rather, from a certain perspective, this gray industry was spread all over the world. Otherwise, where did the cheap and authentic goods in the country come from? However, the information hinted at by the next record made her expression turn serious. Can you be sure? Of course not. The professor shrugged. No one would reveal this kind of thing. No, everyone who knew the details has already been buried. How can we find any concrete evidence? However, the report compiled by the professor clearly linked the large number of missing people in the surrounding countries over the years with the Chi family's smuggling routes. In other words, Chi Wen might have been secretly smuggling a large number of people into Exine High. But after all, people were alive. Even an idiot needed to eat, drink, and defecate every day. A living person appearing in a big city might not be conspicuous, but thousands of living people appearing in a small place like Exine High. Even a ghost would know that something was wrong. But the problem was, where were the people? Where did they go? Did they disappear after coming to Exine High? No. If that was the case, thinking about the returned citizens after the Salvation Society and the mutants that they reared, AI Ching had a guess of what happened to those people. In any case, the place that they went to would not be some kind of paradise. It looked like this was the basis of the cooperation between Chi Wen and the Salvation Society. Chi Wen provided them with an endless supply of people for their living sacrifices, while the purified people supported them in the dark under the guise of the Savior Society. Not only did they provide funds, they could even hand over some inconvenient tasks to them. This was a complete replica of Chi Wen's gloves back in the Yin family. It was just that his gloves were whiter than the others. It looked like he had learned a lot. Just as she was deep in thought, AI Ching's expression changed slightly. After a long time, she closed the file. What else? The professor looked confused. If that's the case, you must have something that you're waiting to sell, right? AI Ching looked at the professor calmly. What else have you not taken out? The professor chuckled awkwardly. I still can't hide anything from you. He took out a thin folder from under the table. He placed it on the table, but did not hand it over. Even though this information is not that important, I feel like it should be something that you should be concerned about. I promise, it is worth the price. AI Ching's expression was still cold. She was not in a hurry to promise the reward. She just looked at him quietly. After a long time, the professor sighed helplessly and pushed the folder over. You win, but this will cost you 3 times the original price. AI Ching shook her head. I will only pay you twice the original price. Deal. The professor nodded, and his expression turned bitter and sad. Inside the folder was a stack of hospital records. There were medical records from the city, outside the city, and even foreign hospitals. There was also a detailed observation of the hospitalization process. The time was 8 years ago. The location was Xian High. 6 managers, 11 company executives, and a few dozen employees were all hospitalized because of various accidents and unexplained high fevers. At the time, there were even many rumors about the plague. Many years later, there were still people who remembered the panic in the market. But in the end, these were all small things that were not worth mentioning. These people were just ordinary people. There was nothing worth paying attention to. The only thing they had in common was that they had worked for the Huai Group and Qi Wen's businesses to varying degrees. And the time was the year that the Huai family officially declared bankruptcy. After quietly reading the records in her hands, AI Qing closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. Let me guess, she said softly. In the end, those people either became vegetative or were burned until they became retarded, right? The professor nodded. Soulless attraction. AI Qing slowly opened her eyes. Her expression was gloomy. Without a doubt, this was a vicious incident caused by a virus that had been mutated by hell. A virus that parasitized and infected a human's body was not a problem that could be solved by normal antibiotics. When there were more than 10 abnormal situations, the local inspector should have immediately reported it to the astronomy committee. However, wasn't there a need to pay attention to how the report was submitted? Seriously reporting this as a vicious incident and casually mentioning a few abnormal situations in the corner of some records were 2 completely different results. To be able to settle this matter, that piece of trash must have received quite a bit of money. AI Qing laughed coldly and tapped on the armrest. It seems like sending him to the border was too kind. Through a vicious virus, they had cleaned up all the insiders, leaving no evidence behind. And Qi Wen had officially swallowed the last of the Huai family's foundation. He had obtained a large number of businesses at a price that was close to plundering. He had completed a bloody capital accumulation and successfully established his own shipping company on the Huai family's corpse. He had gone from a penniless foreign merchant to a reputable tycoon in Xian High. It could be said that he had spent a lot of money. If there was no incitement from the Yin family behind this, where did he get the courage to act so recklessly? The professor suddenly said, but there is one thing that does not explain. I know what you want to ask. AI Qing could not help but laugh coldly. It was nothing more than why he had spared Huai Shi's life after completely swallowing up the family's assets. Isn't this the most considered thing about Qi Wen, this loyal dog? Chapter 65. According to what AI Qing knew, the relationship between the Yin family and the Huai family could be traced back to 80 years ago. At that time, Huai Shi's great-grandfather was a rare rank for ascendant. He obtained a large amount of wealth from the open borders and retired. At that time, it could be said that he had helped the Yin family a lot and had played a significant role in reviving the declining Yin family. However, following the death of Huai Shi's great-grandfather, the Yin family began to rise again, but the Huai family had never produced another ascendant and gradually declined. In the end, the Yin family chose to hit the Huai family while they were down when they needed funds the most, causing the Huai family to completely collapse. Following the death of Huai Shi's grandfather, Huai Shi's parents disappeared with a large amount of wealth. This was a straw that broke the camel's back. This process was so smooth that they could write 800,000 words. Even a ghost wouldn't believe that there wasn't something shady going on behind the scenes. It was a feast that everyone had worked together to create. Inshur ate the meat, Qi Wen drank the soup, and in the end, Huai Shi was left as a fig leaf. Look, it's not that I don't care about our old friendship. This is just normal business competition. It's just that your family's descendants are too outrageous. For the sake of all those years ago, I'll leave you a piece of cake. How humane is that? You can't say that I'm going overboard now, right? Obtaining practical benefits, preserving the Ian family's face, and giving an explanation to his old friend who passed away. Isn't it great to have all three? In any case, in this world, everyone would carry the person on their side. With this layer of explanation, everything became bright and beautiful. It was simply unreproachable. As for Chi-One, that old dog, actually wanted to break free from the Ian family's chains after obtaining the Ascension rank. That was another matter altogether. Over the years, Chi-One acted as a protective umbrella for the returned citizens, quietly hiding all of the Savior Society's actions in the dark. Using this method, he rapidly searched for benefits and quietly grew stronger. It was as if he had already become a powerful force. Even the Ian family couldn't casually punish him. Instead, they had to squeeze out a smile and show their sincerity to welcome this once loyal dog back into their embrace. Right now, that old master must be in a wonderful mood, right? Even though she was angry and gloomy, AI Ching couldn't help but maliciously think that when that face full of age spots forced a smile, it must be very ugly. But then, her heart sank again. How was he supposed to break the bad news to Huai Shi? Now Huai Shi was watching the two of them quarrel. In the basement of the detective's office, once he stepped into the door, he heard the detective sigh. From how I see it, that group of returned pure people is going to do something big. I'm afraid Xian Hai will not be the only one in trouble. Shut the F***ck up. Yu Dongri was furious when he heard it. Can you stop making wild guesses? With that crow's mouth of yours, even if it's not, I'll make it sound like it is. Bullsh**T. This is called a reasonable guess. The detective sneered. Do you think I won't write a 100,000-word thesis for your Q.E.D.? Go ahead and write it. The ability restriction order on you hasn't expired yet. Aren't you afraid that Tian will use the Rainbow Bridge to send a group of defenders to kill you? I might not be able to write about the returned pure people causing trouble, but you think I can't write about you? If one day I'm going to die, I'll definitely sell you first. Under Huai Shi's shocked gaze, the two of them started a brawl. To be more precise, it was the detective who was beaten up. Soon, the detective with a swollen face started to beg for mercy. Yu Dongri was already used to this man's foul mouth, so he let go and stopped arguing with him. Only Huai Shi had a hard time believing the layout of this basement. Impressive. He glanced at the various guns and grenades hanging on the wall. Do you sell these things as well? If I did, I would have been caught by the Special Affairs Department a long time ago. I wouldn't have a time to sit here and talk. The detective rolled his eyes. These are all tools used by someone to commit crimes. F***ck off. I'm doing this to bring peace to the people. Lu Dongli was sitting on a chair. He untied the bandages and poured medicine on his wounds while grimacing in pain. With his upper body naked, the wounds on the man's body were quite scary. The wounds that looked like children's mouths quickly closed under the medicine. After a night of treatment, they did not look so bad anymore. After he finally sighed in relief, he put on his clothes and looked at Huai Shi seriously. You must have many questions to ask now. Huai Shi was silent for a long time before he scratched his head awkwardly. Actually, I've pretty much figured out everything that I need to know. There's nothing much to ask. If I really have to say something, I hope that Tian will deal with the issue of the returned pure people as soon as possible. Actually, they've already started. Yu Dongri looked troubled. But the problem is, Xian Hai is not the only place facing this problem. I got the news from the action department last night. He sighed helplessly. The entire coastal area of Dongsha, including Xian Hai, has discovered the returned pure people in more than 6 cities. Their fishing boats are even on the sea. If you ask me, I think they're really going to do something big this time. That's why they're in such a hurry to gather their forces. In fact, all the border hunters in the Jinling area have already started to mobilize, but Dongsha refused the Tian's intervention. In the end, they'll probably use the power of the Social Security Bureau. The Social Security Bureau is the upper-level organization of the Special Affairs Department. It's the department that manages the ascendants in Dongsha. Although the name is similar to another place, it's actually a separate and secret department. You'll probably get used to it in the future. Huaisha was silent for a long time before he nodded. He noticed Yu Dongri's helpless expression and squeezed out a smile. Sorry, I didn't sleep well last night. It's normal. No one can sleep well in a situation like that. Yu Dongri comforted him as if he didn't notice anything. He put a cup of hot tea in front of him and said, drinking more hot water is good for your health. It's hard to avoid dealing with such matters when working for the Astronomy Society. He deliberately avoided the scene of Huaisha losing control last night. Although he could feel that Huaisha was hiding something, Yu Dongri did not intend to delve into it. No one was born with godly strength, just like no one was born with perfection. There would always be times when everyone would encounter something troublesome. Chattering and asking too many questions would not solve any problems. It would only annoy others. However, he felt that something was different about Huaisha. He didn't look like the young man from the past, nor did he look like the evil spirit he saw last night. She clearly looked like she hadn't woken up yet, but she gave people the feeling that she had finally been freed from a long dream and was able to return to the mortal world. Something was injected into the empty shell of a smile. It made him different from past. Just as Yu Dongri was thinking uneasily, he suddenly heard a bang in front of him. He saw Huaisha slap his knee and suddenly get up. His expression suddenly became flustered. F***CK. What's wrong? He looked up in surprise. I just remembered. Huaisha slowly turned back, looking nervous. I don't think I practiced the piano today. Yu Dongri rolled his eyes and didn't want to say anything. Sure enough, he was overthinking. If this kind of guy was left alone, he would only be a fool for the rest of his life. After confirming that Yu Dongri's injuries were fine, Huaisha was ready to leave. He was also told by Yu Dongri not to reveal his whereabouts. He was afraid that this guy was going to do some investigation next. Although Huaisha wanted to know, he still had to report to AI Qing this afternoon. He really didn't have time. But just as he was about to leave, he was stopped by Yu Dongri. Huaisha. In the end, Yu Dongri couldn't help but worry. Are you okay? I'm fine. Huaisha turned back and waved at him with a smile. Don't worry. Just like you said, I have to learn to accept it, right? Yu Dongri was stunned. The door closed, and the young man's footsteps gradually faded away. Why did he leave? The detective, who had just rummaged through the boxes and cabinets to get the purchase list, looked in the direction of the young man's departure. After a long time, he shook his head and sighed. Wow, why does your little brother seem to be in a hurry? Yu Dongri sighed helplessly. Then, he turned around and rushed up to beat him. Shut the F***CK up, Crow. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it started to drizzle. The rainy season was about to begin. Fortunately, Huaisha moved quickly and rang AI Qing's doorbell before the rain got wet. Since she was the only official member of the local astronomy club, she didn't need to set up an office in an office building. The office was directly set up in the study on the second floor of her house. According to Huaisha's conjecture, he even suspected that AI Qing might have pocketed the venue rental fee that was given to her by the higher-ups. It was really enviable, after arriving outside the door, looking at the exquisite little garden and villa behind the fence. Huaisha couldn't help but feel worried. They were all houses, but why did his house look so poor? Sure enough, he should sell some more powder and find someone to paint the outer wall, or buy a few new pieces of furniture. He thought as he was welcomed into the house by AI Qing's maid and brought to the study on the second floor. Mrs. waiting for you. She pushed the door open and motioned for Huaisha to come in. AI Qing's study could only be said to be extremely simple. There were no bookshelves, elegant paintings, or potted plants. There was only a table and a chair for guests. AI Qing seemed to be writing something on the computer. She frowned slightly and didn't notice Huaisha coming in. It wasn't until the maid served tea and reminded her in a low voice that she came back to her senses. Sorry, I'm submitting some reports on the problems left behind by my predecessor. She rubbed her forehead and looked up at Huaisha. She was stunned for a moment. What's wrong with you? Me? I'm fine. Huaisher smiled blankly and scratched his head. Probably because you didn't sleep well? AI Ching looked at him strangely for a long time, as if she accepted this explanation, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she looked like she didn't know what to say. Did something happen? Huaisher asked. No, nothing. AI Ching shook her head and denied it. She took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. It was rare for her to lose her composure. By the way, why did I call you over? Huaisher wasn't sure. I remember you said it was a courier? Yes, a courier. AI Ching rubbed her eyebrows. After a long time, she suddenly said, I remembered wrong. I originally wanted to say that the bounty for the red gloves has been issued. Huaisher was puzzled. The people of Green Sun generally have bounties on the Astronomical Association and various countries. Although most of them are similar to the bounty for the head, there are still quite a lot of bounties. A total of 47 million US dollars will be transferred to your account later. Huh? After being stunned for a long time, Huaisher finally reacted. Hearing that more than 3 million US dollars had fallen from the sky was like picking up a diamond-studded golden pillow when he was sleepy. He was overjoyed and excited. Oh, thank you. AI Ching was silent for a long time. She glanced at the box under the table, and her expression became a little complicated. In the end, she didn't take it out. Congratulations, she said. From now on, you don't have to work for money anymore. Chapter 66. The transfer was not troublesome. To avoid trouble for Huaisher, AI Ching even used the highest exchange rate in the past few days to help him convert the money into Xia dollars. She transferred the money to him through the Astronomy Society's bank account to prevent him from being investigated because of the unknown source of his wealth. As a country of the Free City Alliance, the American Federation could be said to be the world's largest economy. It also had the world's largest reserves of gold and spirit crystals. It operated the world's largest spirit crystal exchange business, so the currency was very valuable. The exchange rate with Xia dollars could reach 1. That was a total of more than $12 million. Suddenly, he became a rich man. Huaisher was overjoyed. With so much money, even if it was only 1/3, it was enough for him to completely renovate his old house and buy a full set of new furniture. As for the remaining 2/3, half was given a crow for budget, and the other half was left for living expenses. It would allow him to live in this small city of Xian Hai until the end of time. After throwing away the burden of being poor for so many years, his mood suddenly became much more relaxed. He slumped in the chair and did not want to move. There's one more thing I want to tell you. AI Ching took a deep breath, and her expression became serious. The Astronomy Society has already labeled your act of killing the red gloves as a righteous act. In other words, the Special Affairs Division will not be able to find trouble with you anymore. I think we should terminate the contract, Huaisher. Huaisher looked at her with confusion. Terminate the contract? Yes. AI Ching nodded. The current you no longer needs to work for me. In the end, you don't have any responsibility for all of this. You should regain the freedom you deserve. After this week, I will do the above and review in the weekly report. Soon, you can return to your life. Huaisher looked at her in shock. After a long time, he scratched his head and asked curiously, But if I leave, what will you do? AI Ching was stunned. After a long time, she closed her eyes and smiled tiredly. She just shook her head, but did not explain anything. I'm sorry, she whispered. Huaisher did not hear clearly. No, it's nothing. AI Ching shook her head and stood up with the help of her cane to see him off. You should go, Huaisher. I hope you can realize your dream in the free world in the future. Her attitude was firm. Huaisher didn't know what to say. He nodded slightly and was about to leave when he heard the phone on the table behind him. Soon, the call was picked up, and Director Fu's voice could be vaguely heard. There was also AI Ching's suppressed anger. Chi-Wen brought people here to turn himself in? How can he turn himself in just because he said so? Huaisher stopped in his tracks. Soon, he closed the door and left. By the time AI Ching arrived at the Special Affairs Department, the interrogation had already begun. What happened? AI Ching tossed her umbrella aside and pushed open the door to the observation room without waiting for the wheelchair. Then, she saw Chi Wen drinking tea with Director Fu. Chi Wen put down his teacup and smiled helplessly at her. "Long time no see, Xiao Qing. I didn't expect you to see third uncle's ugly deeds." AI Qing's expression was indifferent as she looked at Director Fu. Director Fu sighed and pointed at the one-way mirror beside him, indicating for him to see for himself. In the interrogation room, sitting behind the table was a middle-aged man with a pale face. He was being interrogated with his head lowered and confessed to all his crimes. "What's going on?" AI Qing turned around, her eyes gloomy. "Who is that? My family is unfortunate." Chi Wen lowered his eyes and sighed sadly. "That's my nephew, Chi Pei. He was raised by me since he was young, and he's smart and capable. I trusted him so much and entrusted him with important tasks, but I didn't expect that bastard to be so blinded by greed. He actually colluded with that group of evil cultists and did so many ugly things. At this point, he was so angry that he almost couldn't breathe. Now that things have come to this, even I can't help him hide it. Director Fu, Xiao Qing, please don't mind an old man like me. I will enforce the law impartially." He sighed sadly. Chi Pei brought about his own downfall. He can't blame anyone else. AI Qing didn't say anything else. She didn't even think about going in to find any loopholes. There were simply too many scapegoats like this. In the collection of 10,000 sins, scapegoats were a type of professional service. From the lowest level of scapegoats to the highest level of customization, they could even change a person from the inside out through implanting memories, catalyzing origin substances, and altering their consciousness. They could even make the person believe that they were a criminal. There would also be a team of specialized legal experts and criminal consultants who would help the employer clean up every detail and mistake from the inside out, completing all the processes so that a criminal would be completely perfect. For at least 20 million USD, they could make someone else take responsibility for all of their crimes. They could even make someone else take action in their place, even if it was to assassinate the President of the United States. No matter how much they interrogated him, it wouldn't be of any use. Instead, it would help Chi Wen clear himself of all suspicion. All he would have to bear was the stain of a bad judge of character, as well as the reputation of placing righteousness before family. After getting rid of the last person in the know, just as he had planned, he was able to extricate himself from this quagmire and find a way out for himself from the pursuit of the Astronomical Association and the Special Investigations Department. In the interrogation room, the perpetrator nodded his head mechanically, taking responsibility for all of the crimes on himself. No matter if it was 7 years ago, when he had lured the Huai couple away with a donation and then murdered them, or when he had collaborated with the purified citizens, he had taken responsibility for every single one of them. He had even confessed to many accomplices and undiscovered matters. This confession was like the art of flowing water. It was very pleasing to watch, and every sentence was filled with unexpected twists and suspense. It was enough to occupy the main plot of a novel. At the same time, he had built a high wall for Chi Wen. It was flawless. AI Qing didn't say anything else. She watched calmly, almost indifferently, as this farce came to an end. She watched as Chi Wen shook off all of the dirt on his body and became clean and white again, just like an old dog that had come ashore. It wasn't until he walked out of the interrogation room that AI Qing, who was standing at the door, spoke. "Do you think you can get rid of everything that happened to you just like that?" she asked coldly. "Or are you saying that no one will find out about what you did in the past? You need evidence to speak. Xiao Qing, do you have evidence?" Chi Wen shook his head helplessly and sighed. "It's really sad that you have such a deep misunderstanding of Third Uncle. After so many years, Third Uncle has watched you grow up. Don't you know what kind of person Third Uncle is?" As such, he smiled helplessly and dotingly. When he looked down at her cold expression, the corners of his mouth curled up into a happy smile. In a gradually empty corridor, he reached out and took a copper pipe from Hiluo's hand. He slowly lit a cigar, took a deep breath, and exhaled a scornful mist. "Actually, it doesn't matter. So if they find out, come after me. Don't joke around. Tomorrow afternoon, Jinling's Social Security Bureau will hold a bid for the border of Penghu. I will definitely win, even without the Yin family. At that time, I will be the person who controls the lifeline of Penghu. Qi Wen watched as Qi Pei, who had surrendered, was escorted to the prison. He casually waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "Even if something happens, even the Special Affairs Division can only clear my name. What can the Astronomy Society do to an innocent old man who was deceived by a cult?" He retracted his gaze and looked at the girl in front of him with pity. "Xiao Qing, you're still too young and inexperienced." Ai Qing was expressionless. She only asked back, "Do you think you could go to Jinling tomorrow?" It's not a thought, it's a fact. Qi Wen was full of confidence. "If you think you can use the power of the Astronomy Society to make me stay, you can try." Ai Qing angrily clenched her walking stick. In the end, she didn't say anything. "Don't be sad, and don't show such an angry look." Qi Wen shook his head and sighed softly. "Isn't your great-grandfather the best example? I started from the age of 29 and followed him for 20 years. I only learned one thing, and that is, the winner takes all." As he spoke, he raised his hand and told her seriously and solemnly through the wisp of smoke, "This is the truth of this world." Ai Qing looked at him indifferently. "I'm not stupid enough to listen to an old dog's story. Mr. Qi, you don't have to waste your time with me." Regarding this, Qi Wen only smiled tolerantly. Finally, he tidied up his suit. He raised his hand and gently brushed the dust off her shoulder. "Do you remember what Third Uncle told you?" He bent down and whispered mockingly in the girl's ear. "Children who leave home have to suffer." Qi Wen ignored Ai Qing and turned to leave. He walked towards the door of the Special Affairs Division. The road was smooth. At the door, Hiluo had already held an umbrella for him, but his footsteps stopped on the steps. He raised his head and looked at the gloomy sky. In the dim and pale clouds, the rain continued to fall to the earth. It was like in the past. The first time he came to this city, it was the same disgusting scene. From then on, he hated this decaying city. Qi Wen retracted his gaze and walked into the car. Hiluo put away the umbrella and returned to the driver's seat. He turned around and asked, "Boss, are we going home or to the company?" "No, we're going directly to Jinling." Qi Wen raised his eyes slightly. Inqing, that little girl, is just like her great-grandfather in her bones, enduring silently, but she definitely doesn't lack courage. No, it should be said that she has the courage to act recklessly, right? I deliberately provoked her today, but she was able to hold back. In the end, she didn't use any of her backup methods. But if we go back like this, she'll use the authority of the Astronomical Society to investigate tonight. Even if she doesn't find anything, she'll forcefully take me away to cooperate with the questioning. It won't take too long, just 20 hours. It'll be enough to make all my previous efforts go to waste. Hiluo was stunned. What about Xiao Yuan? Don't worry, he's already been arranged to be in a safe place. Even to his confidant, Qi Wen didn't reveal his entire plan. He was even more guarded. Did you make the arrangements last night? Hiluo nodded. Very good. We'll go to the south of the city first, then take the Xinjiang Highway. Qi Wen said slowly. Arrange for people to take the sea route. Also, remember to keep that thing well. Hiluo nodded knowingly. After a series of orders were passed down through Hiluo and the secretary in the front passenger seat, Qi Wen slowly narrowed his eyes. After preparing for so many years, it's time to turn things around. From today onwards, no one would be able to make him his lackey. In the gradually thickening curtain of rain, the motorcade disappeared into the gradually dimming light on the horizon. It was as if they were drowned in darkness. Qi Wen gradually fell asleep. After a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes. He opened his eyes. The car stopped. Chapter 67. The entire Special Affairs Division was completely silent. Everyone felt as if a volcano was about to erupt. When they passed by the director's office, they all tiptoed. They were afraid that the slightest noise would trigger the bomb inside and drown them in anger. You're scaring them. Director Fu sighed helplessly. He looked at the shadows that quietly floated by the unlatched door and poured a cup of tea for the girl in front of him. What are you afraid of? You're afraid of a cripple like me? AI Ching seemed to be amused, but there was no trace of a smile on her face or in her eyes. Don't worry, no matter how bad it is, I won't make a scene in the Special Affairs Division. No, I just want to persuade you to calm down. Director Fu shook his head. He wanted to smoke, but he seemed to have thought of something. After hesitating for a long time, he finally rolled up his sleeves and put a nicotine patch on his arm. Whether it's the Astronomy Society or the Social Security Bureau, in the end, we still have to follow the rules. Since there are rules, there will definitely be things that are not happy. You don't need to put too much pressure on yourself. To be honest, I'm not worried about Chi-One. AI Ching sneered indifferently. No matter how much he looks like a person, he still has the habits of a dog in his bones. Just because he has a few bones, he will carry them around and show them off. If he is content with staying in a corner, the Yin family can't do anything to him for the time being. But he actually wants to jump into the quagmire of Jinling. He doesn't even think about it. No matter how powerful he is he as powerful as the Huai family in the past? In less than 2 years, he would be completely devoured by those aristocratic families. At that time, he would probably have to thank the Yin family for sparing his life out of consideration for their past relationship, right? What I'm worried about is the people who are purified. In this matter, Chi-One is not the key, but the problem is that all the clues we could find were all destroyed by Chi-One, that bastard who thinks he's smart. She knocked on the armrest expressionlessly. Now, other than a pile of corpses and ruins, we only have a Bulsh asterisk T prophecy poem in our hands. Under such circumstances, if those fellows really make any moves, we're simply sitting ducks. Director Fu didn't say anything. He just anxiously rolled up his sleeves and put on 2 more nicotine patches. After so many days, whether it was the internal announcement or the private communication between colleagues, they had almost all learned about the situation around them and the large-scale mobilization of the pure people that had not happened in recent years. Not only Exine High, more than 8 cities had also discovered the anomaly. Almost the entire eastern coast of Dongxia had been affected. If they weren't careful, another border war would break out. Who knew how many people would be affected? No one wanted sparks to break out in their own jurisdiction, whether it was from the perspective of duty or professional life. However, this was not the only thing that made AI Ching feel uneasy. There was something else that made her frustrated and even angry. Just like when you forgot to bring your keys or turn off the faucet, the premonition lingered around. When you knew that your damn intuition was about to start working again, it was hard to feel good. Although this talent was appreciated by many, few people could understand how much AI Ching hated it. Especially when you didn't know when a shoe upstairs would drop, it made her hate it even more. This anxiety curled around her mind until a certain moment, she finally found the source of this anomaly. She stood up abruptly, grabbed the walking stick, and walked back to the door of the interrogation room. She looked around. The corridor was empty, and there were trash cans everywhere. The ashtray on top of the trash cans was filled with a small bottle that looked like an eyesore. AI Ching reached out to pick up the bottle that was about the size of a thumb. There was still a drop of light purple liquid left inside. It smelled faintly bitter like some kind of drug. The test paper that she carried with her showed an orange-red reaction. She could confirm that this was some kind of drug that came from the border. The orange-red color was between the red that represented a stimulant and the yellow that represented a tranquilizer. She looked at Director Fu. Who else was here earlier? Director Fu was confused. He pulled over a random subordinate who had just finished organizing the statement, but the subordinate also looked at them with confusion. Are you talking about Huaishir? The subordinate thought about it, and then turned to AI Ching. Are you guys together? Ha! The bottle shattered on the ground. Finally, when the other boot was finally thrown down from upstairs, AI Ching realized that other than being stunned and shocked, she actually felt a sense of relief. What's wrong? Director Fu asked. AI Ching supported herself with her walking stick and waved her hand weakly. Now go and check your personnel. Focus on the armed guards and their weapons. Director Fu trusted and understood AI Ching. Even though she did not explain anything, he still gave the order according to her request. Soon, after a short search and inventory, the attendance and arrival record for the day were handed over to him. Not a single one of the armed guards was missing. However, there was an error in the attendance record. Someone was missing. Soon, the missing person was found in the cubicle of the toilet. His body was tied with rope, and his mouth was sealed with tape. He was struggling with all his might. Old Wong, Director Fu, was stunned. As soon as the tape was torn open, Old Wong ignored his violent coughing and shouted loudly, "It's Huai Sure, it's Huai Sure." He took the key to the armory. Really, this is terrible. In a moment of dead silence, AI Ching leaned against the corner of the wall and closed her eyes tiredly. That bastard. Did he know what he had done? Soon, the shadow of a young man carrying a travel bag was seen walking out of the armory. It was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. From time to time, he would wave and say hello to acquaintances passing by. He walked all the way out of the Secret Service office unimpeded. He had an automatic rifle, 6 magazines, 2 pistols, 50 pistol bullets, 6 grenades, 2 plastic explosives, and so on. It was like he was shopping in a supermarket. He had returned with a full load. With a calm smile on his face, he hailed a taxi and left silently. Director Fu was going crazy when he saw this. Damn it, if he had known, he would have shot that bastard on the spot. He pulled the sweaty guard over and questioned him loudly. How long has he been gone? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Even a dog can sense that something is wrong in 20 minutes. Are you worse than a dog? Director Fu was so angry that he almost tore the guard's hand off. Seeing AI Ching calmly drinking tea next to him, he became even more irritated. Why aren't you anxious at all? What's the use of being anxious? AI Ching put down her teacup and sighed softly. If we really want to start preparing for something, maybe we can start discussing what style to use for Qi Wen's funeral. 20 minutes? Don't be kidding. It's too late. 20 minutes ago, it was raining cats and dogs. On the viaduct, the taxi sped along, breaking through the layers of rain. Disco songs from more than a decade ago were playing in the car. As the Buddha plate hanging from the rearview mirror rotated, the driver shook his head and hummed along with the song. In the passenger seat, the young man holding a huge travel bag stared blankly at the rain outside the window, as if he was looking at the blackbirds in the sky. "Young man, this won't do," the driver said. "You've been in the car for half a day, and you don't even have a destination. Now that we're almost on the highway, can you at least tell me where you're going? Why don't I find a place for you and you change cars? I'll charge you $20 less." In the silence, the young man just looked out the window quietly, as if he didn't say anything. It was only when the driver couldn't help but ask again that he spoke. "No need, sir. Just leave me here." "On the viaduct? Young man, do you want to die?" The driver looked at him in shock. "You'll lose points if you park here." "It's okay." The young man took out a foldable raincoat from the travel bag and put it on. "When the time comes, just say that you were threatened by me." As he spoke, he unzipped the travel bag and showed the driver the gun and the bronze bullets inside. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes and the taxi stopped on the viaduct, almost causing a rear-end collision and provoking angry honks. The driver's face was pale and he raised his hands. "Young man, please spare me. I still have a family to feed. I only have this much money. If it's not enough, I'll get more." The young man smiled, shook his head, and took out his phone. He scanned the QR code and paid 3 times the price. "Sorry to trouble you." He opened the door with his bag and politely said goodbye. "I wish you a happy life. Goodbye." The door closed. In the heavy rain, the taxi sped up wildly and fled. Huaisher was left alone in the same place. The thick curtain of rain seemed to swallow everything. Countless raindrops shattered in an instant, setting off a roar as if the world was shattering. Other than that, there was a palpitating silence. Everything became foggy. Only the traffic lights under the viaduct were glaring red. The cars coming and going came out of the rain and fog and disappeared into the rain and fog, just like running monsters. And right in the middle of the countless steel monsters, Huaisher stood in the middle of the viaduct. He bent down and put down the travel bag. One by one, he clipped the pistol, magazine, and bullets to the vest under his raincoat. He sorted them out, these on the left, those on the right, and some in the middle. So it gradually became heavy. So it gradually became full. It was as if he had found his internal organs one by one. They seemed to be beating in his empty lungs. Step by step, he became whole again. His empty body seemed to welcome back the aura of his soul, until finally he picked up the heavy automatic rifle and hung it on his shoulder. In a trance, Huaisher seemed to finally be whole. But it seemed that something was missing, until he finally remembered to put the earphones hanging on his collar into his ears. Then, the rough drumbeat and bass tore apart the noisy silence. Hashalos Thismond? Canhasir Shebland? The young man tapped his fingers on the gun and hummed softly along with the song. Can he walk all the blood will he fall? Did he still have any sense? Was he blind? Could he still move forward? Or would he fall down as soon as he moved? In the long or short wait, he shook his head along with the rhythm of the drumbeat. He wandered between the rain and the viaduct. Like an invisible soul, he let the heavy cars pass by. It was as if he was waiting for the bell to ring in the distance, until the pitch-black birds once again streaked across the shadows of the rain. He slowly raised the gun in his hand, put it on his shoulder, and removed the safety. Through the rain on his hood, he stared at the outline gradually emerging in the rain. The high beam illuminated his eyes. At that moment, he pulled the trigger. Chapter 68. Bang, bang, bang. Like champagne shattering on a stone slab, the rainwater on the gun vibrated, flew up, and stopped in midair. In the almost frozen time, smoke slowly spewed out from the air vent of the gun, together with tiny sparks. In the blink of an eye, the sound of friction turned into a low roar. The bullets rotated in the barrel, rubbing along the rifling and bursting with sparks. 3 burning red bullets flew out of the muzzle, tore through the air, and smashed the solidified rain. The burning light reflected in the broken rain, and at this moment, an unknown illusory light was refracted. Then, the illusory light was torn to pieces by the deafening gunfire along with the rain. After crossing a long distance, the killing intent that had solidified into metal whizzed over, smashed the front window of the motorcade, and sank into a strange face in the passenger seat. Blood splattered. The loud noise spread. Huaisher stood where she was, gazing at the shattered front window through the barrel of the gun. She pulled the trigger again. The gun but hit his shoulder, shaking up the water droplets on his raincoat. They flew into the air and merged into the broken fog. Then, the harsh sound of brakes came from a distance. The car in the front seemed to have skidded, running wildly in the rain and splashing water. In the end, it suddenly lost its center of gravity and began to roll and slide. In the end, it fell to the ground with its chassis facing the sky and no longer moved. In the gradually rising thick smoke, only a few wheels were still slowly rotating on their own. They separated from the axles and fell to the ground, rolling far away. The gunshots were still raining down like rain. When a bullet completely blew up the fuel tank, viscous flames gushed out from the basket and rose into the sky. It was as if a bonfire had been lit in the thick fog, emitting a violent light. It illuminated the shadow, standing on the dugga. In the distance, the traffic stopped at that moment. All that could be heard was the sharp sound of horns and the sound of cars reversing. The entire dugga seemed to have been taken away from the city by the storm and fog, becoming lonely and silent. Huaisher stood in place, pulled out the magazine, and threw it on the ground. He took out a new magazine from under his raincoat and stepped forward. Just behind the overturned car, the moving convoy came to an abrupt halt. The cars at the back began to retreat quickly, while the car at the front suddenly turned sideways. The windows opened, and the bodyguards in the car began to fire back. They jumped out one by one, then fell down one by one. Huaisher stood behind the burning basket and pulled out the empty magazine. She rummaged around in her pocket until she found the handle. She opened the cover and pressed the trigger. Silence. He was stunned for a moment, lowered his head, and pressed again. Thus, a heart-relaxing roar came from afar. Amidst the loud noise, the plastic explosives stuck on the bridge suddenly exploded, and the gushing flames engulfed everything. Large pieces of broken stones and the bridge fell from the overpass and fell into the rolling river, splashing water and disappearing. The motorcade that was rapidly retreating came to an abrupt halt, hovering at the edge of the fracture. He was so close. Fleischer clicked his tongue, threw away the grip in his hand, pulled out the magazine again, stepped over the flowing flames on the ground, and slowly walked toward them. When the blast of the explosion ended, the rainwater that had accumulated in the air once again fell to the ground. It covered everything. It engulfed the thin figure. Amidst the violent tremors, Chi woke up from his dizziness and was almost thrown out of the chair. He reached out to support himself on the back of the chair in front of him and looked at Iluo in the driver's seat in shock. "What's going on?" "Someone is attacking." "Boss, don't move." Iluo put down the steering wheel and picked up the walkie-talkie. "Car 0 is safe. Are cars 2, 3, and 4 still there?" Amidst the sound of the electric current, there was a continuous response. It was mixed with the roar of gunshots. The dense rainstorm scattered endless water droplets, as if swallowing everything. Nothing could be seen clearly, and only the continuous gunshots, screams, and roars could be heard from the walkie-talkie. Finally, there were heavy footsteps among the gunshots. Papa! Whoosh! It sounded like someone was curiously flipping through the walkie-talkie on the other end. He patted it hard twice, shook off the water inside, and then brought it close to his mouth and greeted curiously. "Hello, is Mr. Chi there?" No one responded. F***CK. Could it be the wrong person? That's not right, it shouldn't be. The voice on the other end coughed awkwardly. "Let me introduce myself. I'm from Huaihai Road. Ba. I'm actually Huaishur. Do you know me, Mr. Chi?" Chiwen didn't say anything. He just stayed silent and listened to the voice on the walkie-talkie. His face was ashen. It doesn't matter. It's fine if you don't know me." The other end sighed. "You've taken care of my parents for so many years. I wonder if they're still alive?" There was still no response. Then there was a regretful sigh. "Is that so? Then there's nothing I can do." Bang! Gunshots came from the other end of the walkie-talkie, and then there were 2 more. There was complete silence. There was the sound of bullet casings falling to the ground, followed by the sound of reloading. Then there seemed to be another car exploding in the distance. In a fleeting moment, it illuminated a thin figure. The transparent raincoat fluttered in the air waves of the explosion. It was as ethereal as the clothes of a departed spirit. Hilawadi's expression became serious. He unbuckled his seatbelt, shrugged his shoulders, and moved his muscles and bones. Soon, as his skin wriggled, layers of dark green scales emerged from under his skin, covering his hands and face inch by inch, turning him into a burly Naga once again. He took out a double-barreled shotgun and 4 machetes from the toolbox and was about to stand up to fight the enemy, but Chi pressed on his shoulder from behind. "Be careful. He's trying to lure us away." The old man's expression was ashen, and it kept changing. There was a hint of malevolence. "I knew that there would be competitors who might attack, but I didn't expect it to be the remnants of the Huai family. Well, I might as well send his family off today." As he spoke, he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "How long are you going to wait?" he asked coldly. "Are you afraid of a little brat?" "Boss Chi, it takes time to take a detour." The man who answered the phone sighed helplessly. "We were almost blown into the river, okay? Who told us that Dongxia was a peaceful country? It's one thing to throw explosives everywhere, but how can a little kid be so crazy?" Chiwen said coldly, "Maybe he's an ascendant. Don't underestimate him." "Don't worry. This isn't a direct confrontation." The middle-aged man who answered the phone laughed. "We're professionals in war." In that instant, the roar of an off-road vehicle's engine rang out from the other side of the overpass. It rampaged, tearing through the curtain of rain as it whistled over. On the slowly opening roof of the car, something slowly rose. It was covered with a dust-proof cloth, but it couldn't hide its malevolent shape. As the disguise was torn away, the machine gun hidden below revealed the reflection of steel. Immediately after, Countless blazing bullet casings flew from the vibrating gun into the torrential rain. The wildly spinning machine gun spat out a whip of thunder and fire that swept over. Chapter 69. The thick fog shook violently, and the rain rolled back. Under the chain of fire formed by the bullets, everything was easily torn apart. Then, the thin figure in the rain was engulfed by the fire. In an instant, it was riddled with holes. A gust of wind blew and swept it into the sky, floating in the rain. Only pieces of the raincoat were left, falling to the ground. But the figure was nowhere to be seen. It was as if the figure was a phantom transformed by a ghost, disappearing after a gust of wind. Where is he? The mercenary operating the machine gun had a cigarette in his mouth and looked around in shock. In the passenger seat, the middle-aged soldier who put down the phone pushed the sunglasses on the bridge of his nose. Be careful, it might be some kind of invisible soul. Everyone put on infrared night vision goggles and keep a distance to surround him. Force him to jump out. A response came from the walkie-talkie. Behind the armored vehicle, a few burly soldiers wearing night vision goggles jumped down. They held weapons and skillfully spread out in all directions, slowly approaching. In an instant, a black object was thrown out from behind the concrete isolation pier on the overpass. It drew an arc in the air and fell in the direction of the armored vehicle. A fragmentation grenade. What the F*CK is a fragmentation grenade? Is it a sublimator or a regular army? Fire in the hole. The moment the teammates' reminder sounded, the huge off-road vehicle began to reverse rapidly, but it was too late. The grenade exploded in midair. At the last moment, the entire off-road vehicle was turned sideways by the driver's crazy turn. Then, flames and air waves burst forth. Countless fragments smashed on the bulletproof armor on the side of the vehicle, and the sound of glass shattering could be heard. But before they could react, at the moment of the explosion, a figure suddenly jumped out from behind the isolation pier and ran toward the closest team member. The speed was unbelievably fast. It seemed to be floating in the wind. After the high-speed development was about to end, the body that Crow adjusted to be a perceptive type instantly exploded with astonishing speed. The black shadow stuck close to the ground, pulling the fog and rain curtain with it, rushing toward them. The well-trained team member did not hesitate and pulled the trigger in an instant. But as if he had expected it, the shadow made a strange turn in the air, almost like a circus, and flew along the trajectory of the bullet. While jumping, the figure's feet drifted across the puddle of water on the ground, creating a soul-stirring splash. Without waiting for the water to fall to the ground, that young and tender face was already very close. In the next moment, they passed by each other, and blood spurted out from the mercenary's neck. The thin figure dodged behind him, pulled his shoulder, and turned around as if he was controlling a puppet. He pointed the gun in his hand in the direction of his teammate, and then gently pressed on the inside of his elbow. It was precisely controlled like a knee-jerk reflex. The pulling of the fascia caused his index finger to subconsciously contract. Before the enemy's body fell to the ground, the barrel of the gun spewed out lethal, poisonous fire. Firepower swept across. The mercenary who had his throat slit provided Huaishur with a temporary shelter. Amidst the chaotic firing of the enemy, Huaishur carried the corpse that was gradually losing its temperature and ran for cover behind another wall. Then, he threw out a fragmented grenade and listened to the sounds of the enemy's frantic movements. He skillfully pulled out the magazine from the corpse and compared the caliber of the bullets. It could be used. What good luck! The dangerous attack seemed to have been effective. The enemy did not dare to surround him anymore. They could only continuously suppress him with fire, forcing him to hide behind the isolation pier and unable to poke his head out. In order to prevent them from throwing a few grenades at him, Huaishur could only try to shoot back blindly. Then, he nervously fumbled around in his pocket. He could not find where the item was. It should have been in the inner pocket of his jacket, until he remembered the travel bag he had thrown on the ground, and then he regretfully slapped his head. This was stupid. At this moment, the rain was getting thicker. Without the raincoat, the rain continued to soak into the collar and soles of his shoes. It was very uncomfortable. Just as Huaishur was hesitating whether to take another gamble and see if the bicycle could turn into a motorcycle, he heard the horn from the armored Hummer. "Are you still alive, kid?" A hoarse voice asked. Huaishur was amused. "Guess. Seems like you're still alive." The person who shouted was not angry. He just straightforwardly said, "You did a good job." "No, I should say, it's the first time I've seen someone perform so well." "How old are you?" 16? 17? Are you an adult?" "No, right? To be honest, I don't really want to kill a kid." "Listen, kid, we still have 9 people on our side, fully armed. You have no chance of winning. Raise your gun and obediently come out from there." "How about it?" "I have a question." Huaishur suddenly spoke. "Ask away." The person who shouted smiled. The conversation was useful. No matter what happened next, they would be able to take the initiative. If they were lucky, they could take down the kid without bloodshed. "Where are you from?" Huaishur leaned back against the wall, lowered his head, and pulled the bolt. He asked loudly, "Rome? America? Or the Russian Federation?" Without waiting for the person who shouted to answer, he said, listening to your cowardly tone, "You must be an American, right? Do you know shame?" "Shame." Incidentally, he also used the Latin words he learned from the Red Glove's memory to curse. The effect of the taunt doubled. The predecessor of the American community was the many free city-states established by the immigrants of Rome, the local Aztecs, and the Indians before the division of Rome. Although when Rome and the Russian Federation competed for Western hegemony, they found the opportunity to rebel, but they also suffered terrible revenge from Rome. At the end of World War I, they were beaten by Rome. They could only rely on the pressure exerted by the Russian Federation on the Eastern Front to survive until the end of the war. The combat power of the Americans had completely become a joke. They were laughed at by the Romans for more than 200 years. Until today, when you walked into any bar in Rome, you could hear people telling classic American stories. The classic jokes were undying, and new ones were constantly being introduced. It could be said that it was the source of joy for the Roman people. Now, it was used on these free fighters cultivated by the American community. The effect was simply outstanding. Huaishur could almost imagine how ugly the expression of the person who shouted was. In the carriage, there was dead silence. "Can you lock on?" After receiving a confirmation from the sniper on the other side, the commander with a pale face finally said goodbye to Huaishur. "Unfortunately, child, you chose a dead end." Huaishur was amused. He wiped the rain off his face and raised his gun. "Do you know? My best result a few days ago was to wipe out an elite team. It took me 2 minutes and 18 seconds. He listened to the long-awaited thunder in the distance and whispered softly, "I guess it will be even shorter this time." In that instant, lightning shot down from the heavens after the delay and the roar of thunder. It illuminated his face. Therefore, the sniper, squatting on the roof of the building in the distance, saw the smile on his face. He also saw the middle finger raised to him. Then, something fell from the sky and landed beside him. The oval-shaped iron object bounced and rolled in the pool of water, making a gurgling sound. The sniper raised his head in shock and looked at the black bird's trajectory as it disappeared into the distance. "FUXK." He closed his eyes. Boom! Flames rose from the top of the building and illuminated the commander's stunned eyes. In the loud noise caused by the fireworks, Huaishur, who was behind the isolation pier, had already shot out along with the gradually intense drumming in the headphones. With the roar of the heavy metal band, the young man let out a hoarse whisper in the whistling wind. "I am Iron Man." Chapter 70. The first thing he felt was the beating of his heart. It was as if the thunder from the sky had descended in his chest. It swelled and echoed, as if it was going to tear his chest apart. It turned all his blood into lava and flowed wildly. The muscles that contracted in an instant expanded like an explosion, bringing indescribable power and speed. It made Huaishur gallop in the storm and torrential rain, like a dark ink mark extending in the fog. In the instant of silence, thunder sounded in the sky again. It was accompanied by overlapping bursts of gunfire. The moment Huaishur jumped out, the mercenaries surrounding the blockade pulled the trigger without hesitation. The crisscrossing firepower net instantly enveloped the youth's shadow, even if his route was so strange and changeable. Huaisher only had time to dodge for a moment before all his escape routes were sealed. On the roof of the Hummer, the machine gun had begun to rotate again, aiming at the running youth. The trigger was about to be pulled. At that moment, there was a bleak white in front of everyone's eyes. It was light. Pure silver like liquefied liquid fell like rain, bursting out countless cold rays of steel shattering, stinging everyone's eyes. It was lightning. The furious thunder fell from the sky. The whip of God's wrath hit the burning basket, easily shattering the burning fire and causing the broken flames to rise. Countless tiny electric arcs slithered out like snakes, spreading out like branches of a tree. They greedily licked every inch of metal around them and jumped between every bullet in the air, illuminating the young man's eyes. In the darkness, a scarlet light lit up. He saw it. The turbulent rainstorm, the sweeping hurricane, the crisscrossing bullets, the burning fire, the surging fog like a tide, and the gradually closing blockade. Everything came to a momentary standstill in this sudden flash of lightning. Then, countless splashes of water burst out. Huaisher stepped on the ground under his feet and jumped up in the cage of lightning and metal. He flipped in the almost solidified wind and finally fell to the ground, brushing against the scorching bullet chain, breaking free of the cage of crisscrossing firepower. It was like walking between thunder and lightning, passing through the lightning and fire. He broke through the torrential rain and tore through the fog entwined in the wind. With a roar that came from his heart, the arm hidden behind his back swung forward. The heavy sacrificial knife flew out of his hand and guided the lightning in the air. It shattered the rain curtain layer by layer and nailed into the skull of the machine gunner on the top of the Hummer. Bang! Absolute kill. There was no sign of blood or mournful wails. In an instant, the unlucky man was devoured by the demonic blade from the inside out, turning into a shriveled skeleton. When the mercenaries turned their muzzles and aimed at the youth's shadow again, he had already returned to his travel bag as he wished. He smiled at them one last time. "I really hope you brought gas masks." The young man aimed his pistol at the travel bag at his feet and pulled the trigger. The bullet instantly tore through the plastic bag, and countless grayish-black dust flew up. Then, a grayish-white flame ignited in his hand. It was like a dust explosion. The darkness formed by the ashes of the calamity swallowed everything. Then, tragic cries of grief and roars of fear rang out. At the last moment when they were swallowed by fear and despair, they saw a pair of red eyes. When the darkness gradually dissipated, the commander who shouted was curled up in a chair and crying like an abandoned little boy. Then, he saw the young man leaning against the car door. As if there was an invisible gravitational force, the darkness formed by the calamity ash was pulled into his body. Like a monster, he was devouring the solidified fear, despair, and death. Huaisher lowered his head and casually inserted the art-like sacrificial knife into his vest. He focused on loading the pistol's magazine, one by one, so carefully. To be honest, you are not elite at all, let alone professional. Outside the broken window, the young man loaded the pistol. He slowly raised the weapon in his hand and showed the dark barrel to the last enemy. At best, you were just a bunch of war dogs. The trigger was pulled. Bang! Everything returned to silence. In the endless rain falling from the sky, he turned his head and stared in the direction behind him. He waited quietly. In the dead silent car, Luo quietly stared at the young man waiting in the rain. Chi-Wen's expression changed as he tried to suppress the panic and anger in his heart. "What is he doing? Waiting for me." Luo sighed softly. "He knows I am here." As he spoke, he pulled out the pistol from his chest and handed it to Chi-Wen. "Boss, if you're unlucky, you may have to go to Jinling alone." Chi-Wen's expression suddenly changed, and he could no longer maintain his calm. You're a gold rank ascendant. Can't you beat him? That brat." Luo shook his head. "He is different from the others." He slowly got up, but was caught by Chi-Wen again. "Don't go." Chi-Wen's eyes widened, and his expression twitched. We don't need to fight with this kind of lunatic. This is the discovery realm. It won't be long before someone comes. Hiluo shook his head and couldn't help but laugh. Do I have to run away with my tail between my legs in front of the same brat twice? He stared at the young man in the rain who looked just like a demon. His eyes slowly narrowed, and his voice was cold. If we don't kill him here, we won't be able to rest easy in the future. As the scales grew, the snake-like face flashed with malevolence. He said, I'll be back in a while. As he spoke, he slowly pushed open the car door and walked into the rain. As he walked forward, two thick arms extended from the gap in his coat at the shoulder blades, and two bronze scimitars were drawn from his back. A slender snake tail stretched out from under his jacket, gently brushing past the puddle of water, leaving behind a trail of poisonous green marks. With a supply of nearly combusting origin substance, the second stage of the complete gold-rank stigmata, Naga, was completely activated, turning his body into a 3-meter-long, four-armed Naga. As his four hands spread out, the water on the ground seemed to be pulled by an invisible force, solidifying around his body like a rolling curtain. The stigmata Naga, which originated from India, was originally a poisonous dragon and a large snake. After it was passed to Myanmar, the alchemists took the local miracle and mixed it and smelted it, forming the four-armed Naga. It also increased its affinity with water. Naturally, it had an advantage over the sea in rainy and snowy weather and in wet areas. Now, it could be said that he was at his peak. Even though he hadn't reached the third stage and had begun to transform into a legendary creature from the inside out, he still had shocking lethality. Just like that, he stared at the young man in the rain. He grinned, and a sinister smile appeared on his inhuman face. Huaisher slowly pulled out the sacrificial knife. After having its fill of fresh blood, the blade emitted a resplendent light, as if it was a death that could bewitch one's soul. Chapter 71. You're right. Long time no see. Hiluo strolled in the rain, tilted his head, and stared at the boy not far away. He gestured slightly with one arm at his waist. Last time when I planted the soulless seed on you, you were only this big. Wait a minute. What did you say? Huaisher raised his hand, took off the earpiece on his right hand, and looked at him in confusion. It was as if he didn't hear him. He was unmoved. It doesn't matter. You probably forgot. Hiluo strolled leisurely, unusually talkative. It's actually a good thing if you can't remember clearly. After all, I killed your parents with my own hands. He paused for a moment, tilted his head, and recalled. You might be a little embarrassed if I tell you. It's a little outrageous that you're still begging for mercy when you're about to die. Unexpectedly, the boy was still calm and even nodded slightly. I actually agree with this point, he said. After all, they didn't set any good examples since they were young. Hiluo's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise, and his footsteps paused for a moment. I know you're trying very hard to make me angry. Unfortunately, what I don't lack the most now is calmness. Huaisher pointed to his head and said softly, so there's no need to play those little tricks anymore. Just tell me directly. The gorgeous sacrificial knife and the invisible axe collided in the air, bursting with sparks, illuminating the cold face of Hiluo. How do you want to die? Strong wind and heavy rain blew in his face. The heavy curtain of rain was cut by the sacrificial knife. Huaisher's weight seemed to disappear, blending into the wind. In the blink of an eye, Hiluo was already close to him, and the knife and axe in his hand were chopping down at his face. Steel collided, and sparks flew. The two crossed each other, but Huaisher's footsteps suddenly stopped. He scooped up a splash from the puddle, turned around, and with the force of the rotation, pressed his weight on the blade and slashed diagonally. Then the wind whistled, and a long tail covered with scales pierced out from under Hiluo's trench coat. The sharp tail was like a nail, drilling into Hiluo's throat, and finally flew past his neck. Hiluo's right arm suddenly turned 360 degrees and blocked the sacrificial blade as if it had no joints. Then the blade on his other arm chopped down. Huaisher tried to dodge, but the corners of his eyes began to twitch wildly. A chill spread through his body, and he suddenly leaned backwards. Then he saw a huge bullet hole in Luo's windbreaker. The shotgun in his hands was already aimed at where he was originally standing through the windbreaker, and he pulled the trigger. The iron rain whistled out. Immediately after, a scar appeared on Luo's long tail. It was so deep that bones could be seen. Flesh and blood rolled up and open to both sides. As he rolled on the ground, Huaishir opened his hand. The formless axe that had been sent flying reappeared in his hand, its origin substance stained with green blood, just like the blood oozing from the wound on his neck. It was poison. Wisps of greenish-black began to spread from the blood vessels on his neck. Together with the blood, they slowly extended to his face, leaving behind a sinister spiderweb pattern. Victory and defeat had been decided. Why didn't I see you use that trick from last time? Luo slowly turned around, his lips curling into a cold smile. Otherwise, you wouldn't have lost so quickly. Huaishir felt a slight dizziness in his head. He raised the blade and looked at his face, then nodded in understanding. Is it poison? He licked the poison blood and smacked his lips. He nodded and said, the taste is not bad. It closed in on him again. Its speed was inconceivably fast. It was even faster than the previous extreme speed. Luo tried to retreat in shock, but the blade was already in front of him. After seeing how evil this blade was, Luo didn't dare to let it cut him again. He raised the two scimitars in his hands in an attempt to block the attack, but it was only when the blades collided that he realized how ridiculous his idea was. An unimaginable amount of energy exploded from the blade, piercing straight through like a hot knife through butter. Was this a fucking blade or an axe? He raised the shotgun with one hand and tried to aim, while the other pulled the poisonous rain curtain that protected his body and rushed toward Huaishir. However, before the shotgun barrel could be raised, it was gripped tightly by a cold palm and stuck. Huaishir rushed forward, ignoring the poisonous rain as if it was nothing. His speed exploded again. He sped up again. Luo roared and swept his long tail, finally forcing Huaishir away. However, a deep gash had been carved into his chest by the sacrificial knife. Even his bones, which were as hard as steel, had been split open. The tragic wound withered in an instant, turning into a stiff charcoal. The powder fell off with a slight touch. Then the heart poison on the blade suddenly exploded. Along with the pain brought by the blade, the double impact of the body and soul suddenly exploded, causing Naga to let out a tragic cry. He waved the weapon in his hand wildly, trying to force back the evil spirit that was eyeing him covetously not far away. The poison had taken effect, no doubt. He was very sure of this, no matter how strong the resistance was. After being infected by Naga's poison, he had to be injected with the serum immediately. Otherwise, it would be difficult to escape death. No, that damn brat should be dying by now. But now, the young man who was like an evil spirit that derived great pleasure from the blood was approaching step by step. The blades in his hands collided with each other, rubbing against each other, emitting a sharp sound from the sparks. A smile finally appeared on his face that was so calm that it could be called empty. Do you miss the last time when you turned into mist? The young man who should have been so weak that he couldn't move sides softly. But unfortunately, I ate all the stock just now. There's nothing left. It would have been better if you had come earlier. As he spoke, he licked the corner of his mouth. Then the blade and axe attacked. Luo roared, trying to get rid of the pain caused by the heart poison. He gathered himself, and his huge body rushed toward Huaishir. The scimitars in his forearms slashed, almost chopping the isolation block on the ground into pieces. But he couldn't cut that drifting ghost. It wasn't just the speed. When Huaishir swung his blade, the power exploded again, almost making him unable to hold the scimitar in his hand. His 5 fingers were numb. The stigmata that was 2 levels above Huaishir didn't bring about a crushing power. Instead, it seemed that they were evenly matched. Luo was even suppressed by the young man's breathtaking blade skills. Whether it was the perfect fighting skills or the dagger fighting that had reached the pinnacle of ordinary people's imagination. Even the elusive axe, It was only now that he realized where the ash that Huaishur had used as a smokescreen had gone. Right in front of his eyes, countless mist ashes rose from Huaishur's body. They danced like flames and swallowed the young man. It was as if he had been ignited with the fire of despair. Those source substances that had been turned into crystals returned to source substances at this moment and merged into his soul, together with endless pain and death. In that instant, He Luo finally understood. Not everyone would be powerless when they were about to die. Some people, the closer they were to death, the stronger they would be. Just as he was in a trance, a thunderous roar burst out from the young man's body. Huaishur moved forward, forcefully resisting the Naga's enormous power, even if the skin on his arm cracked inch by inch. However, after his skin was shattered, the ash fire that coiled around his skin burned even more wildly. When the pain of millions of people gathered in one place, it also brought about the anger of millions of people. Origin's substance fluctuations that surpassed the limits of ordinary ascendance burst out from his body like a tidal wave. Huaishur stepped forward, and the blade and axe slashed down. He Luo's left hand was empty, and the scimitar that was covered in cracks completely fell apart. Immediately after, he lost sight of the young man in front of him, and a sharp pain came from his back. The sacrificial blade with the invisible axe had already completely cut off the arm that was holding the shotgun. Poisonous blood spurted out, but it couldn't hide the young man's scarlet eyes. It was like a fire that had reached its limit in a furnace, and even the torrential rain in the world couldn't extinguish it. The light was fanatical. The fire is ready. After layers of torrential rain, the crow standing on the tall building whispered softly, "Only by suffering injuries can one not fear pain, and only by knowing death can one control despair. Using this to create a miracle in the abyss, your sacred mark doesn't come from the furnace and fire, but from your body and soul." Only the last key is left, Huaishur. Accompanied by the Naga's sharp roar, the long tail flew into the sky, circled, and landed on the ground, twisting and twitching. But this time, the pain of the heart poison was resisted. The Naga suddenly turned around, and the huge monster brought with it rain, once again displaying its sole ability. A sea of air descended, enveloping its entire body. The air became as viscous as seawater, difficult to break free. The Naga, however, nimbly and freely soared in this sea of air, suddenly reaching out its hand towards Huaishur. The distance was too close. It was almost within reach. Huaishur couldn't dodge in time and felt his shoulder being pinched by an iron clamp. Then, the remaining 3 arms surrounded him like iron hoops. Regardless of the blades and axes that Huaishur slashed on his body, after sealing off all his dodging areas, he was completely captured. The terrifying strength belonging to the alien beast level erupted, shrinking inch by inch. He wanted to completely crush Huaishur in his arms. He could almost hear the wail of Huaishur's bones breaking. But then, he felt a sudden sharp pain from the wound on his ribs caused by the sacrificial knife. It was penetrated by a palm, and the 5 fingers flipped his internal organs and suddenly contracted. Then, between the 5 fingers, the invisible axe gathered again, and a torrent of heart poison erupted from the inside out. The sharp pain overlapped, and together with death, it exploded thousands of times, forming a roar that the soul couldn't bear. His arm loosened a little, and Huaishur broke free. He Luo gritted his teeth, roared, and casually tore off his windbreaker to wrap around the wound on his chest. His 3 arms spread out, and he soared in the sea of air. Rally the flag. For a stigmata that had reached the 2nd stage, they already had the terrifying vitality of some legendary creatures. It was like the former Chi, you could still escape under the concentrated fire of sniper rifles and automatic rifles. He Luo lost an arm and a tail. Although he was seriously injured, it wasn't to the extent that he couldn't move. And Huaishur was already an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as he put in a little more effort, he could crush him as easily as crushing dry weeds. Then, he saw Huaishur quickly retreat. With a smile on his face, Just like that, he raised his blood-stained left hand towards him, and the small ring circling around his index finger. There was also a slender bolt on the ring, as if it was pulled out from somewhere. At the last moment, Luo lowered his head in shock and looked at the wound. Through the sharp pain, he finally felt the iron that was stuffed there and the terrifying temperature that was about to erupt. Boom! The poisonous blood exploded together with the flames and internal organs, spreading in all directions like dark green sparks in the air. In the blink of an eye, it melted into the rain. Only broken limbs and broken bones were left falling from the air. Even if the entire upper and lower body had been blown apart, Naga's steel-like bones still didn't fall apart. Luo's body fell from the air and smashed into the burning basket. Although he had lost most of his body and all of his arms, and his internal organs were burned into charcoal, it was incredible that he was still alive. On the verge of death, under the washing of the torrential rain, the remaining one I moved with difficulty, unable to stop the loss of vitality. Until now, Huaisha finally breathed a sigh of relief. Immediately, he knelt on the ground and almost fainted. The origin flame was completely extinguished. He panted tiredly, feeling the intense pain from his limbs and body. His vision turned dark, and his ears seemed to be buzzing with bees. But he didn't lose consciousness. Even though he was exhausted, in the torrential rain, he staggered forward, crushing the turbulent puddles on the ground. Finally, he came in front of Luo and looked down at the ferocious face. He didn't know why, but he suddenly laughed, because he thought of a joke and wanted to tell him. Once upon a time, there was a woodcutter who went to the mountains to chop firewood. The youth suddenly said, when he was crossing the bridge, his axe accidentally fell into the river. But this was his only axe. He was very sad, so he cried and cried, just like you. At this time, the river god appeared from the river and asked him kindly. Huaisha raised the sacrificial knife and the invisible axe in his hands and placed them on his shoulders. He asked with the river god, "Did you drop this golden axe or the silver one?" She asked, "Did you drop this golden axe or the silver one?" Naga's eyes widened. His lips struggled to open and close, but he couldn't make a sound. "Yes," the woodcutter said the same thing as you. In the silence, Huaisha nodded approvingly. Then the river god said, "You are really an honest child. You can have both axes." Thus, the knife and axe crisscrossed on Naga's neck. In the almost roaring sound of steel, the last of the poisonous blood splashed out to both sides. A head covered in scales rolled to the ground, no longer making a sound. That was the end of the story. F*CK, the river god. F*CK, the golden axe. F*CK, the silver axe. F*CK, the woodcutter. F*CK, everything. Those old stories were too long. It was time to end it. Today, Huaisha turned around, crossed the dead viaduct, and walked towards the end of the story in the torrential rain. He walked towards the last survivor. Then, he opened the car door and smiled at the old man in the car. "Mr. Chi, sorry to keep you waiting." Chapter 72. Only the roar of the rain could be heard on the quiet viaduct. The endless torrential rain seemed to have separated this place from the mortal world, isolating everything and swallowing the entire world. "So this is what you look like." Huaisha opened the door and stared at the old man in the car. He ignored the gun pointed at his face and looked at him seriously. His mottled white hair was meticulous, his expression was dignified, and his suit was well ironed. He was so dignified that he looked like he had just walked down from a podium. "You really have a decent face." Huaisha pushed away the slightly trembling gun and sat in the car, dripping wet. He sat opposite Chi-Wan, the rain and blood on his clothes leaving streaks of dirt on the leather sofa. It was good to be rich. He looked around at the exquisite decorations in the spacious car. He looked down at the soft carpet under his feet and the black footprints he had left behind. He smacked his lips and looked up to ask, "Do you have a cigarette?" Chi-Wan did not speak. The veins on the back of his hand holding the gun bulged. He used so much force, but he did not have the courage to pull the trigger. After a long time, The gun fell weakly on his knees. Huaisha finally found several cigars sealed in copper pipes from the hidden compartment of the armrest. They looked unbelievably expensive and smelled like money. "Thank you." After politely thanking him, Huaisha took out a knife and pried open the copper pipe. He cut the head and the butt of the cigar like in the movies, but the cut seemed to be a little too big. The whole cigar was about to fall apart. He was so scared that he quickly squeezed it tightly. After all, a loose cigar would waste a lot of money. He thought about it and took two more. He would bring them back for old Lou to try. In the silence, Chi-Wen quietly looked at him, looking poor as he rummaged through the car. Finally, he spoke in a hoarse voice. "Where is he, Luo?" "Dead." Huaisha searched for a lighter in his pocket and told him casually, "Look back at the isolation pier, the one that fell on the ground." Chi-Wen was stunned. His lips opened stiffly, but he did not speak. In the end, he leaned weakly on the chair, his mottled white hair hanging down. It was as if he had collapsed in an instant. Finally, he revealed a trace of weariness in his resentment. Huaisha finally found the lighter. Grasping it in his damp hand, he spat out a flame and lit the tail of the cigar. He took a deep breath, and then naturally began to cough violently. It was sucked into his lungs. Soon, he threw the cigar out the window in disdain. It was so troublesome to smoke it, so it was definitely not a good thing. These rich people must have too much money to burn. "Excuse me, please wait a moment." He finally remembered. He waved his hand and began to rummage through his pockets. "Antidote, antidote, where is the antidote? Ah, it's here." He found a small bottle in the inner pocket. It was filled with a colorless, viscous liquid that looked like glue. Crow had assured him that the effect would be outstanding, but he still felt that there was something wrong. Huaisha sniffed it suspiciously, but did not smell anything strange. He raised his head and drank it in one gulp. Then he felt a deep, bitter taste explode in his mouth, spreading all the way down, stimulating his throat and esophagus, and finally churning in his stomach. It was like a big hand that kept digging. It extracted all the poisonous fog and pulled it into a ball. Then, Huaisha's expression suddenly changed, and he subconsciously covered his mouth. Soon, he bent down and vomited violently. A pile of green blood clots, lunch, and the milk tea he bought on the way. He vomited all of it. It stained Chi-Wen's handmade leather shoes. It was such an eyesore. "Tissue, tissue." Huaisha fumbled for the tissue in a flurry, directly pulled the box over, wiped his face carelessly, and then pulled out 2 pieces to blow his nose. In the end, the ball of paper was thrown out of the window into the silent wind and cold rain. He let out a long breath and finally relaxed. The blood vessels on his face that were dyed dark green gradually returned to their original color, revealing a slightly young and calm face. He looked at Chi-Wen in front of him. He looked at him carefully. Suddenly, he asked, "Have you eaten?" Chi-Wen raised his eyes and glanced at him as if he was looking at a fool, but he did not speak. "To be honest, I thought you would run away." Huaisha grinned. "It's like a game of hide and seek. You pretend to be a human, and I pretend to be a ghost. You run in front, and I chase from behind. Besides, it's raining. Look, how romantic." "You win, Huaisha. Congratulations, you successfully ruined my career and my life." Opposite him, the old man looked at him with cold eyes and laughed. He slowly raised the gun in his hand. "You can be proud as much as you want. This is the right that the winner has won, but don't think that I will wag my tail and beg for pity." So, he arrogantly glanced at him one last time. He put the gun under his chin. He pulled the trigger. In the silence, there was only the sound of rain. The sound of rain outside the car window mixed with the sound of rain inside the car window, and there was no difference. Only a hoarse scream suddenly rang out, full of pain, as if it wanted to pierce Huaisha's eardrums. Chi-Wen's hand fell to the ground, along with his gun. Blood spurted out from the smooth incision on his elbow and flowed down his exquisite suit. Finally, like a meandering stream, it merged into the soft carpet, dyeing it a gradually spreading dark red. "Calm down. I didn't mean to humiliate you, and I didn't want to be so rough." Huaisha corrected him sincerely. "Actually, I just wanted to see you smile." As he said that, He reached out and pulled Chi Wen's hair, pulling him up. He looked at the twisted and ferocious face and asked softly, "Tell me, when my home was destroyed, did you smile?" Of course, Chi Wen did not smile. He glared at Huaishir and panted violently. He spat blood-stained saliva at him and landed on his face. But Huaishir was still calm. Calm, as if he could not feel the anger. "Speaking of which, I should congratulate you first," he said. "I remember you said that after the bid opening tomorrow, you would be able to control the route of Peng Hu. From then on, you would be the master and wouldn't have to be anyone's dog." Huaishir said solemnly, "Congratulations, Mr. Qi. Your dream is about to come true. You **king. I should have killed you back then. You damn leftover." Chi Wen glared at him and cursed hoarsely. "Whether it is you or your parents, you are all a bunch of useless trash who can't do anything right. I really should have buried you with them. I should have torn you into pieces." "Why aren't you smiling, Mr. Chi Wen?" Huaishir asked doubtfully. "Isn't realizing your dreams something to be happy about?" Chi Wen did not say anything else. He just glared at him. His bloodshot eyes were full of viciousness. Huaishir let go of his hand in disappointment. He pulled 2 pieces of tissue and wiped the saliva on his face. "I have always had a goal," he said softly. He pondered and said softly, "I want to live a healthy life. I want to study hard, get into college, become a musician, support my parents who don't treat me well, meet a woman who loves me, marry her, teach our children seriously, live my life respectfully, and die peacefully surrounded by my family. If there's a dream, this is probably my dream." As he said that, he shrugged and spread his hands helplessly. "Look, a cheap second-hand piano, 2 family members who don't love me, an old house. This is all I have. But now, I don't have a family anymore." Rainwater continued to fall from his wet hair, mixing with the blood and turning into a murky red color. It was impossible to wipe it off, leaving a winding trail on his face. "Mr. Chi Wen," Huaishir said, "I have lost my dream. I am very sad." Chi Wen grinned maliciously. He opened his mouth to speak, but then there was a roar from the car. Smoke slowly rose from Huaishir's pistol. The bullet passed through Chi Wen's lips and came out of his face, nailing into the dashboard of the driver's seat. Blood spurted out. "Please don't speak." Huaishir looked up at him and thanked him sincerely. "Thank you for being willing to listen to me for so long. I feel much better now. Now, we should finish what we haven't done." Chi Wen's face twitched. In the young man's hand, the barrel of the gun was slowly raised and aimed at his face. The path to hell was reflected in his trembling eyes. Huaishir pulled the trigger. Bang! There was an awkward sound from the barrel of the gun. There was no more bullets. "Sorry, this is my first time taking revenge. I'm not very experienced." "Please wait for a moment." Huaishir fumbled for a handful of bullets from his pocket. He tried to take out the magazine in a hurry, but it seemed to be stuck. No matter how hard he pressed the button, he couldn't get it out. Death seemed to be close at hand, but it lingered not far away, quietly enjoying this rare comedy. Among the soft sounds, there was the sound of a cello. Huaishir's phone vibrated. Huaishir didn't answer, but it kept ringing, as if it would persevere until the end of time. Until Huaishir pressed the phone, a little annoyed. "Hello? Who is this?" he asked. "If you have something to say, say it quickly. I'm busy here. I am AI Ching." A familiar voice came from the phone. What's the matter?" Huaishir held the phone on his shoulder and focused on dealing with the stuck magazine. "By the way, I would like to ask, speaking of which, how do I change the bullets in this gun that was issued to me? I have been researching it for a long time. I am waiting online. It is quite urgent." AI Ching was silent for a moment, then asked, "Where are you now?" "I am at home. The rain is so heavy. I am very scared and very lonely. I can only hold a gun to keep warm." It sounds gay, but this magazine really can't be open at all." A sigh came from the phone. "Don't waste your energy. The gun is installed with a safety lock." Her voice became cold. "Also, the surveillance camera told me that you are not at home." "Huaishir, you're sitting in front of a dying man on the overpass of the Jinhai Expressway, trying to blow his head off with a bullet." Huaishir was stunned. He subconsciously poked his head out and glanced at the camera not far away. Sorry, the signal is not very good. What did you say? Listen to me, why sure. If you kill him here, you will only be punished. Neither the Astronomy Society nor the Special Affairs Department will allow it. Put down the gun. Believe me, one day, this matter will be resolved in a way that will satisfy everyone. Then will they kill him? Huaisher asked back. Shoot him, or hang him, or the electric chair, or to be more humane, injection of drugs? AI Qing did not say anything. I'm only 17 years old, sister. Don't say these things that I don't understand. Huaisher grinned and sighed helplessly. If you want to say it, it doesn't matter if you are punished. It doesn't matter if you are locked in prison. But there are some things that must be done. Even if you are struck by lightning, you still have to do it, right? After a long silence, AI Qing asked softly, Do you have to do this? I have to do this. The young man raised his eyes and looked at Qi Wan, whose expression had changed drastically. He calmly announced he must die. The last thing he heard was a sigh. The phone was hung up. Immediately after, Huaisher heard a crisp sound coming from the gun. The clip smoothly slid out and landed in his hand. Huaisher was stunned. After a long time, he shook his head helplessly. Don't do something that will make you an accomplice, okay? After a long period of being stunned, he finally sighed and put down the gun unhappily. Congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. Chiwen was stunned for a moment before he was overjoyed. However, before his smile could bloom, he saw the surprise that Huaisher had given him. There's a new way to die that you have never tried before. In that instant, a pale flame slowly ignited in the young man's raised right hand. In the flame of the source substance, strands of material rose, revealing a metallic gray texture. They intertwined with each other and were intricately woven together, forming a rope as thick as a pinky finger. He screamed and subconsciously wanted to push open the car door and escape. The farther the better. He ran wildly in the rain with all his might, almost falling to the ground as he moved forward on all fours. However, the rope snaked over like a snake and silently wrapped around his neck. Then it suddenly tightened. At the last moment, he heard the young man's whisper behind him. Then, before you die, please empathize with my sorrow. Faster, faster, faster. In the passenger seat, Director Fu roared angrily at the driver. We are the F*King Special Affairs Division. Why should we care about traffic lights? Hurry up. Under his urging, the rampaging motorcade roared through the city and rushed in the direction of Duga. From afar, they could hear the rumbling of collapsing buildings, as well as the loud sound of explosions and gunshots. F*CK, the Astronomy Club. I should have F*King killed, that little B** star back then. Director Fu's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. What was this? How was this a F*King explosion? This was an endless list of reports and reflections. It was over. Not only was there no hope for a promotion, it was already a miracle that he did not get an internal report. Right now, he couldn't help but want to call Fu Yi and ask her where she found such a combat classmate. But now it was too late. He could only pray that Qi Wen's men could hold out a little longer and not be killed by Huaisher. If that happened, it would all be over. Holding onto the warmth in his heart, he hurried along the way. When he finally reached Duga, his heart was completely cold. F*King hell, why? Anyone with eyes could see the young man sitting on Duga's fracture. He sat quietly in the rain and wind, his head lowered as he stared at the gradually clearing sky and sunset in the distance. Beside him was a dangling rope. There was also an old corpse swaying in the rain and wind. As if tortured, his body was twisted into a strange shape, spasming until he died. His mottled white hair was soaked, covering the distorted face of suffocation. And just under the open lapel of his suit, someone had written an epitaph for him with blood on the white shirt of the deceased. I thought that in this world, the winner takes all with a gentle breeze. The corpse flipped over lightly, revealing the bloody confession written on the back. I was wrong. Chapter 73. Huaisher opened his eyes and saw the snow-white ceiling, the steel bars, the 4 drip beside him, and the steel tracking ring on his leg. It was obvious that he was lying in prison. To be precise, he was in the detention room of the Special Affairs Department. There were no guns or cannons aimed at him, and there was no restriction on his sole ability. No, Director Fu should be eager for him to secretly escape from prison, right? That way, he could shoot him to death for 5 minutes to his heart's content. He slowly moved his arms and legs, feeling his body's weakness and hunger. How long have I slept? 2 days. Outside the cage, the girl sitting in a wheelchair and reading a book answered without raising her head. Oh. Huaisher nodded slowly, yawned, and propped himself up from the bed. After a long sleep, he finally woke up, feeling an indescribable fatigue and sleepiness. He was drowsy. Just as he was gradually waking up, he heard a scream coming from the cell next door. "Let me out! Let me out! I'm innocent. I don't know anything." He was stunned for a moment, then looked curiously at the wall next to him. Who's next door? Qi Wen's son, Qi Yuan. A piece of trash who was scared out of his wits after finding out his father was dead. With just a little bit of trickery, he confessed everything. Even though Qi Yuan was next to her, AI Qing's words were not polite at all. She looked deeply at Huaisher and added, "Thanks to you, although there were some unpleasant episodes in the cleanup of the Qi family, overall, it went very smoothly." "No need to thank me." Huaisher smiled honestly. "This is what I should do. Can you tell which part of my thank you?" AI Qing asked indifferently. "If you really wanted to be grateful, you wouldn't have put down the gun and killed Qi Wen in another way. Attacking the staff of the Special Affairs Department, looting the armory, attacking in public, seriously endangering public safety. After killing 16 ordinary people and 1 ascender, he tortured a suspect who had not yet been convicted and lynched him to death. Even if his crimes were proven through evidence, it was still a serious violation of the law. Either one of these is enough for you to be locked up in the trench prison until you die. While you're doing these things, you're still an employee of the Astronomical Association. Now, the Jinling office is in an uproar because of you. Do you know how much trouble you've caused me?" Huaisher was speechless. After a long time, he sighed and lowered his head. "I'm sorry. That's the most sincere apology you've ever given me." AI Qing praised from the bottom of her heart. She closed the book in her hand and asked mockingly, "Then, tell me, what did you get after taking revenge at all costs?" Huaisher was silent for a long time, scratching his face awkwardly. "I really want to say that I didn't get anything from revenge, but, to be honest, I'm really happy." After that, he couldn't help but put his hands together again. "I'm sorry, I accidentally became perverted." He felt like he was perverted. Wouldn't most people feel empty in their hearts after taking their revenge? Why did he feel happy? This wasn't right. You're not perverted, but shouldn't you be happy about revenge? AI Qing glanced at him. "If it were me, I'd probably laugh until tears came down. Maybe I'd be even more ridiculous than you." Without waiting for Huaisher to heave a sigh of relief, she continued, "But a fully equipped mercenary team with a Tier 2 sublimator. What a shocking feat. No, it's more accurate to say that it's terrifying as your unlucky officer. Should I be surprised by your skills?" She emphasized the title. Mr. Huaihai rode little page. Huaisher was speechless. He didn't know if he should continue to apologize this time. In the end, he could only shrug. "I know what you want to say, and you don't have to apologize for such a boring thing. After all, we've always been hiding things from each other, haven't we?" AI Qing paused for a moment, then suddenly said, "However, you should really feel that it's a pity." Qi Wen is just a glove that's thrown away after using it, a dog that can't even decide who to bite. AI Qing took a deep breath and said straightforwardly, "The person who really pushed the Huai family into the fire pit back then should be the current head of the Yin family, my great-grandfather, Yin Xing. In other words, I'm also one of your enemies who destroyed your family." Huaisher was stunned for a moment and looked at her in shock. After a long time, he nodded slightly. There was no anger or shock on his face. Instead, it was as if he suddenly realized something. "So that's how it is?" He scratched his head and finally understood something. Then he widened his eyes in shock. Wait, so your surname isn't AI? So that's the main point? Don't you feel that it's a pity that you didn't kill me? Then, do you regret not eliminating them completely? Huaisher calmly asked, although I don't know what happened exactly. You and your great-grandfather are completely different, right? Moreover, I just killed a boss, and you're telling me that there's still a second round. I don't feel that it's real. Why don't we go back and discuss it? AI Qing didn't answer, nor did she try to explain anything. After a long silence, she sighed softly. There's no point in saying anything now, Huaisher. She slowly shook her head. Originally, with the convenience provided by the Astronomy Association, you could have become strong enough to settle everything. Now, it seems that I might have made a wrong decision from the beginning. I thought that I could control your fate, but in reality, I can't even control my own fate. Now, it seems that it's time to end this ridiculous delusion. She stopped talking about the previous topic and returned to Huaisher. Like a lawyer, she said, although you have the right to take revenge, what you did before is still a crime. Fortunately, the Jinling branch hasn't determined the nature of this matter yet, and the Social Security Bureau hasn't strictly pursued this matter. I'm afraid that the trial won't begin until the matter of the purified people is over, right? During this time, I'll try my best to help you reduce your sentence. If the situation isn't good, you could transfer to the Social Security Bureau. With your talent and potential, I'm sure they won't care about your mistakes. As if he was in a hurry to leave, he finished everything in one breath. As for Director Fu, although she's furious, she's actually just yelling. There are many people in the Special Affairs Department who sympathize with you, and most of the time, they'll let you have some freedom during this period of time. I hope you can rest here in peace. Is there anything else you need? She asked. If it's not too much, I can bring it for you. Okay. Huaisher pondered for a long time and asked embarrassedly, is the piano okay? If I don't practice for too long, I'm afraid I'll be out of practice. That's it. That's it. AI Qing nodded. It was time for her to go. But before she turned the wheelchair around, she suddenly said, I have one more question. Go ahead. Why did you choose to stay at the Astronomy Association? She looked into Huaisher's eyes and asked solemnly, you should know in your heart that even without me, you'll be fine, right? Why bother with the troublesome matters of the Astronomy Association? I don't know. Huaisher answered straightforwardly, but AI Qing obviously didn't accept this answer. She still looked at him calmly until he scratched his head and thought for a long time before he finally came to a conclusion. If there must be a reason, it should be you. Me? AI Qing was almost amused by this answer. You're risking your life because you like a female cripple? Is there something wrong with your sense of beauty? Or do you like to play a special game? No. Huaisher hurriedly waved his hand. I'm just envious of you. He looked at the girl outside the cage and said seriously, because you look very brave. In the silence, AI Qing didn't speak, as if she was stunned. She just looked at her with a complicated expression. After a long time, she slowly shook her head. No, Huaisher. She turned and left. I've never had such a luxurious thing. When AI Qing left the detention control room, she saw Director Fu smoking at the door. It seemed that his road to quitting smoking wasn't easy. There were always bumps in the road. Is that little bastard still alive? He asked. AI Qing pointed behind her. He's locked up here. You can see whatever you want to see at any time. Forget it. I don't want to accidentally kill him with a gun. After writing dozens of reports in the past 2 days, Director Fu's eyes were red. The higher-ups said that they're temporarily supervising him. They'll probably start the trial after this is over, right? What's the attitude of the Astronomy Society? In Xian High, I represent the Astronomy Society. AI Qing answered directly. He's my employee. What's the attitude? Director Fu looked at her with shock. Are you crazy? You want to take the blame with him? Why not? AI Qing asked back. Am I not a crazy woman in your eyes? Director Fu looked at her for a long time. He stepped on the cigarette, but sighed and turned to leave. Only AI Qing sat quietly in her wheelchair, gazing at the sunlight shining on the ground in the distance. For some reason, She was reminded of the past. The happy childhood, the sudden disaster, the dark hospital room, the herself who had lost her legs, and the young man who played games with her. It was too long ago. The memory slowly blurred, and it was no longer clear. She couldn't even tell what was real and what was a lie that she made up to escape. Perhaps from the beginning, they were not from the same world. She pushed the wheelchair away. Then, in the bushes, a sneaky crow popped its head out. Chapter 74. After AI Ching left, the crow sneaked out from the corner. Oh, she's finally gone? The crow sighed. I can't stand it anymore. You really broke her heart. Did I? Why Sure was stunned. I don't remember teaching you this kind of scumbag tone. The crow rolled its eyes. Clearly, at this time, if you were a little more gentle and said a little more understanding, you would be able to open up a great line. As she spoke, she suddenly realized something. That's not right. You didn't say that on purpose, did you? Why Sure was silent. It was not because he was afraid that others would find out that he was talking to a crow. Anyway, no matter how they looked, they would see him holding a book in a daze. He just didn't know how to answer this question. After a long time, he said, When I was very young, I understood one thing. The thing that the world doesn't lack the least is cheap recognition and kindness. These things don't have any guarantee of effectiveness. They are the same as unwarranted intimacy. They are all products without any value and meaning. When you don't understand a person's pain and past, how can you make any guarantee for her future? Instead of adding pain and anger in the end, it's better to maintain a respectful distance from the beginning. AI Ching doesn't need my pity and recognition. She is much stronger than other people. If I say something worthless at this time, talk about hot-blooded friendship and victory, it will only make her look down on me. So you're casting a long line to catch a big fish? The crow nodded. I take back what I said just now. You may be killed in the future for playing with a girl's heart. Can't you hope for me a little better? What's with casting a long line to catch a big fish? Sure rolled his eyes. Did you come to me to talk nonsense? Isn't this just a coincidence? The crow spread out its wings. Seeing my boy on the verge of friendliness and unfriendliness, the feeling of a rock spreading its wings. How should I put it? It's really complicated. Then did you hear what she said? Yes. Bean family? Sure asked. It might be possible. Crow nodded. So what will you do? Yes, what would I do? Sure muttered to himself, but did not answer her question. We'll talk about that later. I'm actually here to inform you. Crow interrupted his train of thought. Although the prison drama was pretty good, it's a pity that your prison life won't last long. They want to shoot me. Sure was shocked. No way. Where is the Minor Protection Act? Ascendants are not covered by the protection of minors. Thank you. Crow glanced at the disappointing guy and said, Why are you panicking? It's still too early to shoot you. Then I want to be released? Sure was overjoyed. No, the purified people are going to do something big, Crow said. Soon, I'm afraid that even if you're in prison, you'll be involved. So be prepared. I'll also finish casting your stigmata before that happens. Something big? Sure was stunned. How big is it? Magic City is such a big thing. I can probably understand what you're going to say, but what the hell is Magic City? Why are they all talking about it, like it's some terrible hell? That's right, it's hell. Crow calmly introduced Magic City in the 27th level of hell, Metropolis in the 29th level of hell, and Holy City in the 31st level of hell. These three places used to be a big problem for the Astronomy Association. After sealing them at all costs, they exiled them to the deepest part of hell. You can treat them as a literal dark zone, a desperate and terrifying area where humans can't survive. Is it that exaggerated? What if I told you that the place where Xian High was originally located was a mega city with a population of tens of millions, occupying 70 to 80 million square kilometers, known as one of the world's economic centers, the brightest pearl of Dongxia, and one of the most important seaports? What would you think? Then wouldn't my family be awesome? Sure's eyes widened. Crow rolled his eyes and ignored him. In the previous era, there was a city like this. It was located at Xian High, but something happened, something that no one wanted to happen. Do you understand? Huaishir was taken aback. She had a bad feeling about this. And then? Then it became what it is today, and it's gone, along with 20 million people. Crow shrugged. Even its name has become a taboo, and you can't even say it out loud. You can only call it Magic City. With that, Crow said, its name is Leifeng. Huaishir could only hear a vague voice. He looked down at the Book of Destiny, but there were only a few asterisks on it. There was an invisible force that removed all information about it from the present world. In the unseen world, all information about Magic City was annihilated. But what does this have to do with the purified people? Next is Sister Crow's exclusive information. Crow smiled mysteriously. What they want to do is nothing more than reopen the road to Magic City. To be more precise, it should be to make Demonic City float up again and appear in this world once more. And the first step to doing this is to tear open a gap in the isolation of the present world to open up a path, and then destroy the world wedge in Exion High or other places to make way for Demonic City. Finally, boom. From a certain perspective, Green Sun and the people of the Pure One share the same goal. The beast of the wind disaster that once descended almost uprooted the world wedge at Exion High. Now, do you understand how bad the situation is? That's right, Chungus said as he slowly spread his wings. Doesn't that mean Exion High is finished? Huaishir was shocked. Why are you in such a hurry? Crow rolled his eyes. It's not just Exion High. This thing might completely disrupt the entire coastal area. Do you think you're the only one who can't sit still? Even if the purified people want to fight with the Astronomy Society and the Social Security Bureau, they won't choose a place like Exion High. The people who are stirring up trouble here are at best playing the sidelines to attract attention. The real battle is thousands of miles away. With your level, I'm afraid you won't even be able to go to the battlefield. Don't worry about it. Then why are you telling me this? I'm afraid you'll let your guard down. I just want you to be mentally prepared in case something happens. As she spoke, she raised her wings and patted him on the shoulder. Don't worry, don't worry. You're my contractor after all. If anything happens, I'll take you with me. Huaishir rolled her eyes. In any case, eat and sleep when you need to, and that's it. Right? That's right, Crow said. The Crow merchant said, when something happens, you can just show your head and kill a few purified citizens. Want your merit points increase like crazy? Want to be easy to reduce your sentence? Maybe you'll be released on the spot after you're done. Your tone. Huaishir looked at her from the corner of his eyes. If something really happens, then so be it. But if nothing happens, then don't do anything stupid. Don't worry. Do you think I'm that kind of person? Crow laughed without realizing it and looked elsewhere. There's no need for me to do anything. We're just missing a fuse, aren't we? However, seeing that you're in good condition, I'm relieved. Otherwise, my family would be very worried. Huaishir couldn't help but roll his eyes at her. My whole family is dead. Who would be worried about me? Don't you still have me? If you want to cry, you can always ask me for a hug. Crow started talking nonsense again. After checking his body as usual, she began to study the new changes in Huaishir's soul ability. Perhaps it was because of Crow's medicine of regret. In the battle a few days ago, in addition to the invisible axe condensed from killing intent and anger, Huaishir found that after deliberately stripping away the negative emotions of sadness, he could also condense them into substance through the hand of confinement. The form was a grayish-black rope. It was as thick as a little finger and amazingly flexible. What was even more surprising was that its length seemed to have no limit. It could be stretched until Huaishir couldn't support it anymore. Usually, it was about 20 meters long. It could move according to his will, and its speed was about the same as his own. Like the axe of anger, the rope condensed from sadness could make the person who was bound feel one of Huaishir's most extreme emotions, and thus lose the ability to resist under the mental impact. It seemed like the soul, hand of confinement, that had been brewed after 7 years of stress had more variations than other simple soul abilities. It wasn't limited to just transforming into an axe. He originally wanted to develop other emotions, but unfortunately, it was in vain. In this regard, Crow's explanation was, there was no need to deliberately force it. Once it was accumulated, it would be done naturally. Although the soul was detached from matter, it was still limited by the body of the ascendant. When he reached the second and third stages, the stigmata would strengthen his body to a certain extent, and his ability would have new room for improvement. At that time, it might be a qualitative change. Therefore, there was no need to waste too much effort in pursuing it. It was better to let nature take its course. At the same time, Crow brought another piece of good news. It seemed that his puberty period had officially ended. Under the stimulation of constant fighting and psychological pressure, supplemented by the concentrated potion, she added, the original 1 month's time was compressed to about a week. And in the process of the battle with the Nagas, he broke through the final barrier. This was the reason why Huaishir found his body so weak after waking up. Not only did he have to repair the internal injuries, but he also had to strengthen the parts that had been repaired. No matter how much saline and glucose he received, it could not solve such a huge deficit. Even if the Special Affairs Department took out alchemy potions to treat him, it was just a drop in the bucket. If not for the fact that Crow had sneaked in and fed him a few doses of the special restorative medicine, Huaishir would have died of exhaustion. Wait a minute. How did you feed him? When Huaishir heard this, he looked at her suspiciously. He could not see where she had hands. Oh, your question is too rude. Crow became shy. After hesitating for a long time, she said softly, of course it's mouth to mouth. Isn't that the fastest way? Huaishir would be a fool if he believed her. After she left, Huaishir lay back on the bed, ready to have another fat, otaku happy dream. But thinking of her reminder, he did not dare to relax. He quietly took out the Book of Destiny from under the quilt and entered the records. Then, not long after, he appeared on the training ground that had been ravaged by him. He was face to face with the burly iron instructor. He did not know if it was because he had farmed this dungeon too many times in the past 2 days, but when the instructor saw him, he subconsciously took a step back and put on a vigilant posture. Brother, don't be afraid. We're not going to practice military boxing today. Huaishir waved his hand and comforted him. Then, he directly used the authority of the Book of Destiny to create 2 dark green scimitars in his hands. He waved them in front of him and smiled warmly. How about you try out this new set of swordsmanship I just learned? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.